I am a teacher, and over the summer I nanny for a family. They have a 1-year-old, and I have known his parents for about 5 to 6 years. Every weekday morning during the summertime, I arrive at their home, somewhere between 8 and 8:30. On Thursdays, his dad, Ben, has a booth selling flowers at a local farmer's market. This past Thursday, yesterday at the time of this post, I was on my way to nanny. I turned onto the side road that eventually leads to the family's home, and I saw what I thought was Ben, the kid's father. He was driving the opposite direction towards me, in the same black Nissan he normally takes to the market, and it was very clear to me it was him as he passed by going the other direction, presumably headed towards the market. I giggled to myself and wondered if he had left early, since it was only about 8:20 a.m., and he doesn't normally leave until 9 a.m. I had an internal monologue about how funny it would be to tell his wife I had just passed him, and planned on asking if he had to leave early for that day for some reason. I know this man well, have seen him and his car many times, and I was sure it was him. However, when I arrived to their home about 3 to 5 minutes after, I was in shock to see his car there. I was even more in shock when I walked in to find him in the kitchen prepping breakfast with his son. I swear I had just seen him. I told him and his wife about this, and they agreed it was weird, especially considering the rurality of the area and the lack of anyone locally matching Ben's description or their car. This experience begins with me and my now fiance going to see some local boxing fights about an hour away in the town over from where we live. We get there, the event finishes up, and then it's nighttime when we're leaving, about 9:30 p.m. As usual, there was a lot of traffic, and we got caught up on a detour through a part of the town that we weren't familiar with, but luckily ended up in the area we were familiar with. As I mentioned before, this town is an hour away from ours, and has a lot more stores and things to do than our rural town, so we visit quite often. When we left, we made sure to stop and fill up our gas tank, and headed out on the freeway back home. This is where things start happening that neither one of us can explain. So we were driving for about 15 minutes, and all was well, until our music turns off on the radio. We didn't think much of it because the radio was not the best, so we continued driving as normal, but we both are just kind of quiet. Out of nowhere, I start noticing that it seems like we're driving on the same piece of road over and over. This is weird because we know the road and the surrounding areas like the back of our hand, so we know when there's turns coming up and exits passing by. There were also no other cars driving by, which is unusual since it's a freeway and it's always quite busy. At the same time, I start to notice that the gas meter is dropping super fast. While watching, it's just dropping quarter tank by quarter tank, until the gas light came on 5 minutes in and the gas tank was empty. Time is also going by super fast, which was worrying to me as well. Based on the clock, it's been almost an hour since we hit the freeway, but we both stayed quiet. Finally, the radio comes back on and we're able to see the lights from the gas station that's placed right between two towns. As I start to put the gas, it was still empty, no cars in sight, and I was getting this really eerie feeling that something didn't seem right. So we finish up and I tell her we need to get home fast because it felt scary. We finally made it, but the weird thing was that it was 12:30 a.m. when we got home, and we hit the freeway at 10 p.m. So it took us 2.5 hours to get home on a usual, sometimes 45-minute drive. To this day, we can't explain what happened, and I later found out that she noticed all the weird stuff happening but that we both wanted to stay quiet so we didn't scare each other. On Wednesday of this week, I was outside around 7:30 p.m., watering our plants around the house. On my way out, I set my phone and my drink on the patio table and make my rounds. When all the plants had been watered, I grabbed my phone and drink and sat in my patio chair. I opened my drink and grabbed my phone to browse, but it was dead. I had a small bit of panic over my dead phone that left me feeling guilty. It was too hot to stay out. I grabbed my phone and headed inside. As I bent over to turn off the fan, in my head I thought, why did I just feel panic? This is stupid. I'm going inside to get my charger just to stare at my phone some more. I opened the sliding glass door to see my husband laying on the couch. He saw me holding my phone and drink. I turned around and asked him if he wanted my drink as I had changed my mind. He said maybe and put it in the fridge. I walked to the fridge and sat the can on the shelf, grabbed a kombucha and took a sip. When I turned around, I realized dinner needed to be put away. I walked to the bathroom right next to the kitchen, and I recall not having my phone. I didn't set it down when I was washing my hands. I started organizing the fridge and putting the food away when I thought I should put my phone on the charger, so it's charging as I do this. Then it happened. Wait, where is my phone? In my back pocket? No? Did I put it in the fridge? The search ensued. I looked in every area I had been since entering the house 10 minutes ago. I searched high and low, and when I asked my husband to help, his response was, "Didn't you just have it?" I said yes, and I wouldn't ask you if I wasn't completely dumbfounded. I am good at sounds. If I dropped it, I know what my phone sounds like hitting the ground, and I would have noted that. We searched everywhere. Searched the trash, recycling, fridge, freezer, cabinets, bathroom, and living room. Could the baby have moved it? No, she was sleeping in her crib. I went out to water after she was put to bed. When I say everywhere, like every crevice outside and in and then some. I am losing my mind. It was late and I thought I'd keep looking tomorrow with fresh eyes. Come Thursday, throughout the day, I continued to look and organize every inch of our home. When my husband got home, he looked again and nothing. Friday, same thing. I never left the house. It's now Saturday morning and nothing. My phone has just vanished and I have no idea. It was in my hand. I don't recall setting it down or it not being in my hand. I just can't explain it. This happened over 20 years ago, so the details of which station have been lost to memory. I used to get the train to York, near where I grew up, from Exeter, where I went to university. Sometimes the most direct route was not possible due to the train line being washed away by floods, and I would go via London. On one occasion, even my normal route through London on the tube was disrupted, and I had to take different lines between Paddington, or Waterloo on a really bad day, and King's Cross. This was a very wet and miserable day. At this particular station, I had to change tube lines, and not being familiar with the area, I couldn't work out how to get from where I was on one platform level to the one I wanted, so I decided to exit the station completely, then re-enter, hoping to pick up the signs for where I wanted to go. On exiting the station, I found myself on an empty street. In warm weather, the sky a yellowish-orange color, similar to how I've seen North African cities appear on TV. One or two old cars on the street, but no other person. I remember being the only person climbing the stairs to leave the station, which had been busy. I remember thinking it was a bit odd. I re-entered the station as I intended, found the platform I wanted, got to King's Cross and on my northbound train to York, proceeded out of the station and into the dank, miserable weather that I'd had all morning. I've often thought about that day, and every so often look at a tube map on Google Maps to try to remember which station that this happened at, but I can't remember or work it out. I'm sitting on the couch with both my kids. My husband went into the bathroom that's in our master bedroom about 5 minutes prior. He comes out of the bedroom and walks into the laundry room. The way our floor plan is set up is where I can see into our bedroom from the couch, but I can't see around the corner to the second bedroom or laundry room. After a few minutes, he is still in the laundry room. I get up and go towards my daughter's room to grab her a book. I turn the corner and the laundry room is vacant with the doors closed and the lights off. Weird. I turn my head towards the bedroom and can see the bathroom door shut and the light on. I walk into the bedroom and call for my husband and he answers. He said he's been in the bathroom the entire time and didn't come out at all. I swear to you I watched him walk right out of the bedroom and go towards the laundry room. He searched the whole house. No one else is in the house with us. I was calling my grandmother from my mobile phone on her landline. I was in a place with poor mobile connection. My grandfather, who passed away around 14 years before, answered the phone. It was the same voice, in the same way he used to answer the phone when he was alive. I froze for a moment, then I said, "Oh, sorry, maybe I called the wrong number." Then I hung up. I checked my dialed numbers, but it was the same right number that I've already had saved in my phone. I didn't even type a number to call it. I just picked her name from the contacts and called. Then I recalled her again, just by clicking on her name from the last call, where my dead grandfather answered, and my grandmother answered normally. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a center park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed bigger space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in as June started. The months passed and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc. All chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and baths on the opposite end of each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths here and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going into the bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics. Or, on good days, she would sit in the bath, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself and my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes, something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act like nothing happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, also would run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying "uppy," which is a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say it wasn't her, but he did say it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the children would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean it wouldn't happen. I asked my wife if she remembered anything from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but thought that maybe I went into the room for something. It wasn't until a while later that she used the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I opened it, and I said I didn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink facing the living room is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and living room, and additionally the back door. After the kids had been put to sleep, my wife and I set about our nightly duties of chores to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the back door a reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bathroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and saw nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I saw. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. Months passed by again, and now we jump to 2020, August. As soon as the activity started again, I kept a journal of all of the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to go to the bathroom in the kids' bathroom before going to bed and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and in the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on the door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on what it was, but begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this, we returned it to being open and haven't experienced anything like it again. August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went to sleep on the couch for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I forced myself to go to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me." And when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind it, stops, and then says, "And how would you do that?" Out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he insisted that he didn't say anything. One occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night, she heard a man's whisper, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in the bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intentions. It seems as if our mail order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it a night. As we went to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped and knocked off, but no. The only way to move the needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. September 4th, after coming home from work, I noticed that the bathroom door was open, after we left it closed all day, and I even asked my wife if she went in there, and of course, she said no. At night, before bed, my wife stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring with eyes wide open. I asked her what the problem was, and she said that she heard someone slapping their palm against the sliding glass door. We investigated and found nothing. September 6th. My wife and I have a small collection of swords that we keep safely in our room. A few are propped up against the wall, being that we had no space. At 7:38 a.m., I woke up to a crashing noise, noticing that the swords propped up had fallen over. It could easily be dismissed as a slippery surface, but we had them in a way where they were firmly against the wall and have never fallen over before. September 7th, Labor Day. No surprise that this is the day we get the kids back, and immediately the activity becomes more rampant. With the day cold and rainy, we spent the holiday indoors and nothing to do but watch TV and eat. As we're doing this, I hear a thud come from the bedroom. Looking in, I see that a Toy Story Woody doll is on the ground. I received it for Christmas from my in-laws and put it on top of the bookshelf next to Buzz. Never has this fallen over, or at the very least, was unsteady. My wife mentioned how I left out another event from this last year that happened to her. She was quick to remind me that once when she was in the bathroom putting on makeup, she saw a face behind the door, almost as if peeking in. She turned and saw nothing. My sister-in-law is an employee at Best Buy and gave us the courtesy of purchasing a security cam for us. All updates will be posted. September 13th. With the installation of the camera, it seems that things have died down, which brings us a sigh of relief. We talked with our son, who's 5, and he told us that sometimes in his room, he feels as if someone is watching him, and not only that, but someone speaks to him. He told me that it sounded like a little boy whispering in his ear when he's laying in bed after we say goodnight. He says the voice says, "Time to go to sleep," every time that it speaks. I asked if he felt like it was going to hurt him, and he said no. This morning, as I typed this, he came rushing to the room and said he heard it again. It was the night before that I set up a microphone to record in the night. I've looked back on the recording and my findings are inconclusive. The children have a white noise machine going on in their room all night, which my son said is where he hears the voice coming from. I've checked the audio closely, and even at hours where the children are definitely asleep, it still sounds like there are full-on conversations happening between people. As of now, I can't make out anything they're saying, and as I understand, white noise machines are meant to mask peak noises, such as conversations from another room. It requires more attention to understand what's going on, but at least my son saying that he hears a little boy confirms my theory of having a ghost child in the home, whom I've heard twice. The week of the 13th through the 19th of September proved to be fruitless in our attempts at capturing any more audio or video. That was the week that we didn't have the children. We switched with their father on Sunday evenings. That being said, the past week of the 20th through the 26th proved to be quite different. The night of the 21st was eventful. We captured a series of events on the camera in the kids' room, and I'll list the timestamps. 8:18 p.m. My wife enters the room with our son to put him to bed. Absolute darkness. Not that the room is dark, but the screen is dark, and there is absolutely no audio. In between these times, my wife comes into our bedroom where I'm on the bed, getting ready to sleep, and she tells me that she heard the kids' door open while she was in the kids' bathroom cleaning. A voice whispered and said, "Mom?" She whispered back, "What?" and felt the clear presence of somebody standing behind her. She turned around and saw nothing. 8:22 p.m. The camera captures our son getting out of bed and leaving the room, where he tells us that he was having a bad dream. September 23rd, 3:14 a.m. Both the microphone setup and the camera capture our son getting up in bed and saying, "That's mine. No, that's mine." September 25th. This night was a big night. I would usually start the recording on the laptop and microphone after the children were fast asleep, but I was so tired myself that I fell asleep early before I had the chance to. The next morning, I noticed the door to the kids' room was open by a large margin. We have ingrained the idea of shutting doors into both kids' head, and even checking the camera footage, our son does take the time to close the door after leaving the room. He didn't get up again for the night. My wife stayed up later than myself and confirmed that the door was indeed shut. 1:25 a.m. Our son wakes up and notices either the door opening or the door being open and promptly throws the covers over his face and goes back to sleep. September 26th, 5:20 a.m. A small tap is heard on our bedroom door. I figured it was our son, so I got up and opened the door, but nobody was there. 6:06 a.m. Our son comes to our door saying that he heard a voice saying, "Hey." I checked the mic, and indeed, before our son wakes up, there is the slightest whisper of "hey," and then our son begins to stir as if he's scared in his sleep and wakes up entirely. 8:59 a.m. While going over the recordings in the kids' bedroom, a few books on the bookshelf fell over. October 7th. It's been a while since I've come back and posted on this, and that's because the activity that's been happening has been nothing more than the expected phantom knocking. Nothing extreme, until last night. We bought for our kids 2 small pumpkins to paint, and we set them on the table out of the way, but this morning both pumpkins were off the table sitting on the floor. One was in the living room and one was in the hallway by the kids' room. October 8th. This morning, my wife said when she was getting ready in the bathroom, she heard what sounded like whispers coming from the bedroom. She looked out, expecting to see the kids, but nobody. Out of the whispers, she could make out, "There she is." I asked what it sounded like, and she said, "Like a little kid. That's why I thought it was ours." On the night of October 8th, we got in the mail a ghost sweeper, a device that sweeps through radio waves and can pick up EVPs. I was excited to use it when it charged, so after the kids were asleep and my wife was in our bedroom, I sat in the living room and held our mail-order ghost, Gloria, who was attached to the ring. Now to note, every time I hold this ring, I get a headache, and last night was no different. I turned on the sweeper and simply said, "Hello?" while holding Gloria. I cannot confirm what I heard, but I heard what sounded like a woman's voice say, "Hello?" back to me. I quickly asked more questions, but nothing more was heard. I decided to put Gloria on. She fits only on one finger, my left pinky, and then I went to bed. I usually fall asleep on my back and stay that way. Once in a while, I'll turn on my side, but last night I couldn't get to sleep until I rolled onto my left side, the same side Gloria was on. Anytime I laid on my back or turned right, I would wake up until I returned to the left side. It was interesting. I am thoroughly convinced my apartment is haunted. People die in them way too often to think it's not a possibility. And if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. As I write this, I can say that 2 distinct entities can somewhat be accounted for. A small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child. We still live here to this day, and autumn is just beginning. That's when things seem to really get interesting around here. I was driving one morning. It was a 75-mile drive that I only had to make about once every 2 weeks. The road is 2 lanes on both sides, separated by a large grassy area. The speed limit was 65. I am a person who stops to help people, all of the time. If I see you pushing your car, I stop and ask if you need help. If your battery is dead in the Walmart parking lot, I'll ask if I can help. I was driving to work that morning, and on the other side of the highway, I see a silver Kia Optima headed down the road, when all of a sudden, it looked as if something caused the wheel to jerk hard to the side, making the side walls of the tires catch the asphalt and cause the car to begin rolling, like NASCAR rolling. I remember saying, "Holy shit," out loud, but I just kept driving. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. This really bothered me for 2 years. Why didn't I stop? Well, about 2 years later, I was driving home in my newish used car, a silver Kia Optima. When I overreacted to a dog running across the highway, I tried to remain in control, but I didn't have a chance. I began rolling violently, but peacefully from my point of view. I somehow wound up escaping with only superficial damage to myself. I now think the reason I didn't stop was because I wasn't able to. Like, it would have thrown things off too much. I'm 39 and I can remember 2 instances where time paused. First, I was on a noisy school bus in 5th or 6th grade. I was reading a book and became aware of complete silence. I looked up and around and everyone was completely still, with absolute silence. The sound of my own heartbeat started to become so loud due to the complete silence of everything else. I looked outside of the bus and we weren't moving. Then it was as if everything outside became hazy or blurry for a split second, and then time, sound and movement, returned to normal, but it took a moment, so there was a brief instance of paused time speeding back up to normal time, if that makes sense. No one else moved on the bus, so I don't think anyone else was aware. The second time I was at work, early 2000s at a medium-sized hardware store. I was working in the back corner and heard someone an aisle over looking through the nuts and bolts drawer. I had a question for my boss, so I spoke over the radio. No answer, so I asked again. Again, no answer. I started walking towards the front registers where the boss would be and realized the only sound was my footsteps and breathing. There's usually music playing, people talking, and clicking of metal tools as people look at them. When I passed the end of the next aisle, the customer that was looking at the nuts and bolts was staring at a bolt in his hand, so I didn't think anything of it and I kept walking. Every aisle I passed, every person was motionless and soundless. The people who had stopped mid-step were the most alarming. My footsteps seemed so loud and my heart started to race. Less than a minute after I hadn't received a reply on the radio, as I rounded the corner to where the registers were, all movement and sound returned to normal in an instant. At the same time, I felt dizzy and had to grip an end cap to stay standing. After my boss finished with a customer, I asked if he had heard me on the radio. Neither he nor my coworkers had heard my 2 attempts to ask a question. I really liked that job in that store, but on a few other occasions, I felt weird sensations in the same area I had been when time stood still. I worked there 5 days a week for over a year after that, and went in every section every single day, so feeling strange only in that one aisle on a few other occasions really stands out to me. Our kitchen looks into our living room. My mom came downstairs from a nap and began pulling stuff out of the fridge for dinner. My aunt was sitting in the living room with her back to the kitchen and she was knitting. The doorbell rang and my mom walked to the front of the house to get it. She opened the door and there is my aunt, holding grocery bags. My mom just stared at her and tried to process what she was seeing. She then walked back to the kitchen and looked into the empty living room. She has no explanation for it, and neither do I. My brother tells me a few weeks ago he was driving on a pretty busy road in our small town. He was approaching a part in the road that has another road that runs across it with stop signs on each side. It was a two-way stop. He said as he was approaching, he instantly got the urge to throw up. He didn't feel nauseous or anything, but he knew that he had to stop and throw up instantly. So he stops the car, opens the door, and pukes. And as he's raising up to close the door after he finished, he noticed a large truck run through the stop sign, going 60 to 70 miles per hour. The way he described it, he was driving and everything happened instantly, and something made him stop and throw up to avoid getting hit. Maybe not that creepy to some, but the way he told it gave me chills. He says after he threw up, he didn't feel sick at all. He went home and ate dinner, and absolutely had no symptoms whatsoever. I live in a very small town. We have a small grocery store, hardware store, you know the drill. I was done getting groceries and hopped in my car to head home. As I pulled up to the end of the driveway of the store, blinker on to get to the main road, I see a big white, lifted Chevy pickup driving toward me that I needed to wait for. I watch it as it drives closer to me, remarking to myself that it looks so similar to my husband's, just older and rusted around the edges. It even has the same black emblem and large iron cross bumper. As the truck goes past me, my jaw nearly fell open. Staring at me intently was a man almost identical to my husband, but with a longer, graying beard and gray hair around the ears. I gathered myself and pulled out behind the truck and up to the stop sign that followed. He was still staring at me in his side mirror, glancing away and then staring at me again. He took off at the first chance he got, and I tried to follow to see which direction he took, but a car was coming and I couldn't get out behind him in time. The truck sped away toward my road, but I don't know if he turned in that direction or not. I know that's a little crazy, but I couldn't help feeling that total connection I feel with my husband when I saw his reflection in the side mirror staring at me. It gives me goosebumps to think about, because it was like he knew that it was me, and I was the wrong age, and that he needed to get out of there before I could follow. I got home and my husband was there working in his woodshop. I told him about it and he chuckled and asked if he looked hot when he was old. I mean, he did, if it was really him. Years and years ago, when I was young, I used to play video games like any young kid did. It was just my thing. I played every day and had an Xbox 360. I didn't want anyone to know what my real name was, but I made an email for my Xbox Live account. The name on the email I created was under the name of Tom Liza. Not really sure why I named the account that, but it was the first name that came to my head. So I was like, what the heck, I'll just use that. So for years I had this account created with a fake name, Tom Liza. I stopped playing video games and 5 or 6 years go by and I hadn't touched the console or video games in general. I'm out one night with my best friend Will. We've just come back from playing dodgeball at this place that we went to on Friday night for some fun. I was 17 then and just got my license. Like any new driver, most of the time, you don't know where you're going. I was stopped at a red light on Route 347. I whipped out my GPS on my phone and it told me that I needed to get into a turning lane. Stupid me, without looking, turns into the turning lane and sideswiped a 2004 Toyota Corolla. At this point, my heart is pounding through my chest because I'm 17 and I've never been in a car accident, nonetheless driving in general for that long. This guy gets out of the car pissed. Long story short, the police arrive, file a police report, and the night goes on from there. A few days go by and I receive a copy of the accident report. I open the letter and begin to read the report, and I stop. I took a second and third look at the police report. The name of the person I got into an accident with was Tom Liza. This happened 20 years ago and I still can't explain it. I picked up my friend to go out one Saturday evening. I was driving and we were blasting the tunes and laughing, ready for a fun night out. To get to our destination, we needed to hop on the freeway for a quarter of a mile, and then off at the next exit. I turned onto the freeway on-ramp, not realizing it was under construction, like a dummy, not paying attention to the ramp close sign. Suddenly my friend screamed, "Look out!" The road was just gone. We both screamed. In front of us was a great big construction hole. But the next thing either of us remember is being at our destination. There's no way we couldn't have crashed into the hole. We didn't even really talk about it until days later. It was like we both just forgot about it. I drove past the exact spot soon after. It was a giant hole. How are we here, alive, not injured, car not scratched? And what happened to those 5 to 10 minutes between realizing we were going to crash and being at our destination? It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year, it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter were aged 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street while my kids go up to different houses to collect candy. About half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood with lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, eh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up to the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye to the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join to trick or treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she's my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the older woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy and didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing, and who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween, hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. This happened in October of 2010, and the reason I can accurately remember that is because this event took place when we were on our way to watch the premiere of Paranormal Activity 2. I was 16 at the time, and although my suburb is rather large and located within close proximity to a big city, there wasn't much to do as a teenager outside of smoking a little weed, driving around and listening to music, or in this case, going to a movie. So 3 of my friends, including my brother and sister, all piled into my sister's beat-up Buick, with the plan of smoking a couple of bowls and heading to the movie. I don't in any way mean to glorify smoking, but I do feel like it's necessary to include to lend to the idea of paranoia that is possible inside the car of a bunch of weed-smoking teenagers. Although, in those types of situations, you're usually paranoid of the police giving you a ticket, or of your parents calling and figuring out what you're up to. This was a bit beyond that, you could say. The residential neighborhoods in my area are essentially maze-like. They all connect, and if you know where you're going, you can drive around the entire town for hours without ever so much as crossing over a main road, which served us perfectly. Our aim was to drive around a while, and once we were ready, we would head to the movie. It was a midnight premiere, so it was dark, and throughout the whole drive, we didn't see another car on the road. We had just decided to head to the theater when we came around a corner to a part of the road where you could visibly see about a quarter mile in front of you with no obstruction, and right in the middle of the street, about 100 feet in front of us, was a woman, standing with her back turned to us. The woman was standing directly under a streetlight, dressed in a white robe which in the light genuinely made it look like a hospital gown. She didn't move. She didn't react to our headlights, to the sound of our approach. She just stood still, looking straight ahead, in the middle of the road. From our best guess, we figured her to be in her 60s or 70s, just based on her stringy white hair and general physique. We all just stared at her. No one spoke. No one did anything, including the woman in the street. For 15 seconds or so, we were all still, waiting to see if the obvious presence of a vehicle behind her would make her do anything at all. But it didn't. She just stood there, back turned to us, staring right in front of her, with nothing but empty street looking back. I cannot exaggerate how straight out of a horror film this situation was. She looked like Patient Zero from a zombie movie. So as smart people do who don't want to be murdered by some spooky Halloween witch, we turned around right there in the middle of the street and noped out of it. It spooked us so much that we all decided to just skip the movie, so we dropped off our friends and just went home. She looked so scary, so entirely out of place that I wholeheartedly believe most people would have had the same reaction that we did. I'm just glad that she didn't turn around. About a year ago, I got an Alaskan Malamute puppy. I was so excited to have a dog. I wanted to go hiking with him, camping, and traveling. It was fall in Iowa, so it can get pretty cold for camping, so I decided to start researching cabin rentals. I had found an amazing cabin in Wisconsin on Airbnb. It was fully loaded, very secluded in the middle of the woods, had a hot tub, internet, pool table, and a great kitchen. This cabin was so beautiful and it was pretty cheap to rent. The first time I had visited this cabin, it was great. It was just me and my dog. I relaxed, we went hiking, I cooked a great dinner, and I slept pretty well. I only stayed one night, it was just a quick getaway on my day off from work. After getting home, I told my friend Martha about this great cabin. She was eager and wanted to take a trip with me, so we decided to go up the night before Halloween. We took off, just Martha, my dog, and myself. That night we had a blast. We drank, cooked dinner, chilled in the hot tub, and then decided to watch scary movies since it was so close to Halloween. Now, I was pretty drunk, but when I was standing in the kitchen, I could have sworn I saw Martha run down the basement stairs, which were right off from the kitchen where I was standing. But when I looked over into the living room, Martha was sitting on the couch, still watching the movie. I was so freaked out, but again, I was drunk, so I kind of blew it off. We both ended up passing out pretty late and nothing too exciting happened. But what happened the next morning is what made me a solid believer in the paranormal. I was always sort of a skeptic when it came to ghosts. I had some experiences that were weird, but I could always somehow justify it as something else, so I always had that doubt in the back of my mind. But that morning, we were pretty hungover. We ate a little breakfast and then decided to go sit in the hot tub. So I decided to lock my dog in his crate and we went outside to get in the tub. It was really magical because it was literally Halloween and it was dumping down snow. We sat in the hot tub for maybe 15 minutes, but then we heard a big bang inside the cabin and my dog barking at something. We got out of the tub and ran inside and literally froze in our footsteps. The entire kitchen was torn apart. All the cabinets were open. The refrigerator door and top freezer door were open. The bar chairs were all flipped onto their backs. Drawers were open and pans were thrown off shelves. Martha's phone was charging on the counter and it was now unplugged and on the floor. I have no other explanation than paranormal. My dog looked terrified, but there was no way that he tore up the kitchen. He was still a puppy, so he wasn't that big, and he was also still locked in his crate. The kitchen was trashed. I know Martha didn't do it because we were both outside at the same time. There was also no way that someone broke into the cabin. We were in the middle of nowhere and it was snowing, so there would have been footsteps. The hot tub is also right next to the long driveway leading to the cabin, so we would have seen somebody drive up for sure. I just have no other explanation on what happened, so now I'm a believer and so is Martha. We left pretty soon after this happened, and believe it or not, I actually stayed in the cabin again, but nothing ever happened. Maybe Halloween stirred up the spirits and they just wanted to be heard or seen in some way, and maybe I really did see a ghost the night before as well. The setting is in my dad's old house that is debatably haunted. It's located in a small one-stoplight town in rural Delaware. It was built in the early 1900s and surely has a long history I'm not totally versed on. My dad moved here to live and run his business after splitting with my mom when I was about 9. Without sounding too stereotypical, this house just had a weird vibe to it. So much so that my dad's girlfriend, who often stayed with him, would get a hotel room when he was out of town or on work travel. She claimed she could hear haunted noises, like footsteps and doors closing. Aside from the paranormal activity, it was factually documented that there were 2 degenerate kids who lived with their parents there in the past. They were known for being troublemakers and often getting arrested. Before I describe the main event of the story, it's worth noting my dad at the time was a full-blown alcoholic and trying to recover. He would tell of agonizing nights trying to quit drinking cold turkey, where he would wake up in delirious sweat, hearing what seemed to be a full-blown party happening in the main room downstairs, with clinking glasses and shouting voices. But when he would open the door, it would all cease. He would also be visited by living and non-living friends of his who all aimed to help him get better. He would fully become sober and live for another 20 years alcohol-free. One night, I'm staying over at his house. I'm about 9 and sleeping in his bed. He just moved in and I didn't have a room yet. Nothing out of the ordinary this night. I still get goosebumps at this point. We're dead asleep, probably about 2 a.m., and I wake up for no apparent reason and look across the bed on my dad's side. I see a small translucent being, sitting or standing bedside, staring at me. It looked like a small alien-like being, except it was see-through and sort of emanating a greenish light. It looked away from me and got back to what appeared to be working away on a computer of sorts. I couldn't really see it because it was below the mattress line. I didn't know what to think, so I rolled over. I processed what I thought I saw, rationalized that it must have been a dream, rubbed my eyes, and looked over again. It was still there, looking at its computer screen. At this point, I realized I was fully awake and totally unsure of what I was seeing. I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep as fast as possible. My dad never stirred and was passed out the entire time. There was no noise from this being. I've had the exact same dream twice. It starts with me going about my day doing normal things. In the first dream, I was watching TV with my husband. In the second one, I think we were doing dishes or something like that. Suddenly, I feel myself beginning to vibrate. My whole being is just a vibration, to the point that it feels like I'm going to dissolve. I instantly know that I'm going to be taken. I'm not scared, but I feel sad, because I want to stay. I'm also a bit angry that I don't have any say in this. Still, I keep calm and accept it, and I realize that I have a few seconds to explain to my husband what's happening. I tell him that I'm going to be taken. I will be away for a while, and I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about it. I also say that I will be back, and he shouldn't worry about me. Then the vibrations get more intense, and I feel myself being pulled upward. I see a tunnel for a second. It looks metallic, and then I black out. Then suddenly I feel the vibrations again, intense at first, but decreasing. I open my eyes, and I'm lying on the sofa, in a different room than I was when the dream started. I feel the vibrations for a couple of more seconds with my eyes open. Then they fade away. I guess this is where I rationalize it to me waking up, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I've been placed where I am, and it doesn't feel at all like I've taken a nap. Both times I woke up in broad daylight. It feels like I've just been somewhere else. Also, it feels like a long time has passed. Not hours, but days. It was 2008, in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada, in mid-fall. I was new to the country and was at a boarding school. I had one Chinese roommate who was very quiet and found out that he could sleep through a storm. One night, I'm the last to go to sleep. I finished up, get to my room, locked the door, windows closed, and my roommate was dead asleep. I'm in my bed facing the wall. I hear 3 knocks. I didn't think much of it, and I turned around in my bed. When I opened my eyes because I couldn't fall asleep, that's when I saw one. It looked like your standard gray alien, but was more pale, had large eyes, but I could make out that it was squinting. It was about 1 meter tall, about 1 meter away from me, and near my roommate's bed. As I looked at it, it turned its head slowly, and we made eye contact. As soon as we made eye contact, my eyes went shut, and I was paralyzed. Not sure if it was out of fear, or if it did something to me, or a combination of both. It felt like 15 seconds or so. My fight or flight kicked in, and I broke free of that paralysis. I quickly sat up in my bed, yelling. I flicked on my bed light and looked around. Nothing around. Door and window were still closed and locked, and my roommate was still asleep. I stayed up for about 20 minutes, checked outside the room and everywhere. Nothing. And our room is high up from the ground. You would need a very tall ladder to get to it from the outside. I went back to bed. I was just getting over it when I heard the 3 knocks again. Because I was now on high alert, it registered to me this time that the 3 knocks were on glass. Our window was glass, to be specific, so I didn't waste time. I shot up, flicked on the light, and rushed over to the window. Nothing. No lights, no craft, no alien. I had no explanation, and I've never had another encounter again. As a teenager, I had a strange series of unexplained interactions with 3 different visitors around the age of 15 or so. All 3 were during some stage of sleep. The first experience was late at night, after I had been asleep for a few hours and seemingly woke up for no reason. I woke up in a slight fog and became very lucid to the presence of someone or something nearby. I remained still and pretended to sleep with my eyes still closed, as I heard the bedroom door quietly open. I could hear the sound of light footsteps on my carpet as this visitor entered my room. This whole time I could feel their presence slowly moving from the door at the left side, foot of the bed, and then make their way around to the right side of the bed where the moonlight was flooding into my room. I feel like I could see the room itself as it was happening, but not the visitor. I felt them stop, and it was as if they were watching me or watching the moon outside the window. I was frozen, as my instincts told me to basically play dead, as if I were being observed by a predatory animal, like a bear or a great white shark, who wouldn't attack me if it didn't feel a reason to. I didn't feel like I was so much frightened as I was frozen and just very confused. Yet somehow I was very aware of the passing of time, which felt like I was nearly suspended in time. I remember speaking to this visitor telepathically in my mind, asking if it could hear me, and if so, to give me a sign. Next thing I know, I woke up, and I forget anything that happened until I remember that my door was locked when I went to bed, and that it was unlocked when I woke up for school that morning. It didn't occur to me until later that day. I don't know what it was, but I have vivid dreams every night since I was a kid. and 99% of them are not like this. It feels like a memory of an experience, not a distant dream. I remember every detail today, and I'm 28 now. The next was a dream where I was lucid in the dream, because I was suddenly aware of someone else watching me. I was walking through an empty playground at night when I noticed this very, very, very handsome person sitting on top of one of those metal climbing structures that are shaped like a dome. This person triggered the most visceral reaction in me, like meeting a soulmate or someone I felt deep love and familiarity with. Yet they also triggered the uncanny valley for me too. My instincts noticed that something was off. They looked too perfect to be human. I said to them telepathically, "I know what you are," to which they smirked at me with unwavering eye contact and said, "I know you do." I was both suspicious and intrigued. Next thing I know, we were at the end of a long discussion I wasn't present for, and I asked this person something I don't recall. They responded with, "Well, are you really sure you want to know the truth?" And I nodded. They said, "You will know one day, but for now, this is going to hurt." And then I'm laying on my stomach with my back exposed, and they pull out some sort of technology like you see in a sci-fi movie, but more advanced, and it had a long needle coming off of it. They gave me a spinal tap that burned so much that it woke me from my sleep, and I felt the residual ache in my spine lingering after I woke up for a few minutes. It was the same atmosphere I felt in my room in the last story too, and seemingly the same time of night too, with the moonlight coming into my window. I fell asleep with no memory of it other than subconsciously referring to that person as my cosmic husband or cosmic soulmate. And I still to this day have this deep knowing that I will see them again one day. This last one was a frightening and disorienting sleep paralysis encounter during a nap I was taking in the afternoon after school. I had barely fallen asleep when I seemingly woke up. I thought it was odd how fast my nap went as I had just laid down. Everything in my room was normal, except I noticed a lamp in the corner that wasn't there before. Then my internal alarms began going off, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I noticed a dark figure standing behind the lamp. I panicked, and I felt like I suddenly was in danger and something sinister was after me. I closed my eyes, thinking it was a dream, and I opened them to see this disturbing entity staring me in the face with the most unnatural smile. It looked sort of like Voldemort from Harry Potter, with the grin of the Cheshire Cat. I tried to scream and nothing came out, so I closed my eyes and felt my chest get heavier. I eventually woke myself up in a panic and sweating. I had only been asleep for less than 30 minutes, and I pretty much felt drained of all my energy and went into the family room where my mom was and crashed on the couch with no explanation. My mom told me she thought it was strange I was asleep at all, because she said she heard me moving around in my room nearby and figured I was awake. I was sleeping the whole time. Let me start by saying that my brother and I are extremely experienced desert campers, and we have lived near deserts pretty much our whole lives. I have never in my 20 years of life, ever for 1 second, believed in anything paranormal or anything to do with evil spirits. Unlike my brother, who has always sensed presences and has been able to see mostly what we call jinn, also known as demons, until last night, which is safe to say marks the last time that we'll be camping alone in the desert. We always have the same place we like to go when we camp with minimum effort, and our day started as normal as ever. But as we got closer and closer to our destination, I saw my brother's mood completely shift. And when I asked him what was wrong, he shrugged me off and told me to just keep driving. When we arrived, I felt completely fine, but my brother was still unusually quiet. It was around 1 p.m. at that point, and we were planning on leaving around 12 or 1 a.m. Because of the heat, we made the terrible decision to set up under a few trees and a source of water, which, in Middle Eastern culture, is where the jinns live at night. Not that I believed at that time, of course. However, we still set up our camp and continued on as normal. Now, my brother always says that when he feels a presence, or several in this case, he gets extremely unlucky. First, he almost dropped a box of coals on his foot. Then, he spilt an entire bottle of Coke on his phone. Then, he dropped it into the sand and then proceeded to smash his elbow on the edge of the chair he was sitting on, which is now very swollen. And last, but certainly not least, when he was looking through one of our boxes, he felt something cold and sharp press right against his arm, and he realized it was an unsheathed knife. He packed it with its case the previous night, and he later said it felt like something pushed his hand into it, right where his veins are. All of these events consecutively, within a matter of a few hours, was certainly making both of us uneasy, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out why he was suddenly so unlucky. As I was starting to question his clumsiness, a random couple appeared out of nowhere, informing us that they were stuck in the sand and needed help. We drive a Land Cruiser, and they had a Nissan Altima, so we didn't expect to encounter so many issues that we did. We first dug them out without any issues, but as we pushed them out of the sand, they got stuck again. If you know anything about dune bashing or desert camping, then you understand the physics behind how wheels get stuck in the sand, and the way this Nissan was stuck was incredibly unusual. It was literally stuck somewhere with plenty of space available for grip. And later, my brother said that as we were digging them out of the sand, that's when he started feeling an evil presence around us, but he didn't want to say anything as to not ruin the trip and freak me out. So we ended up having to tow them out of the sand, which, again, was far harder than it had to be. First, our tow strap broke off their bumper. Tow straps cost about $200 and was fine, but their bumper was slightly damaged. Then we almost got stuck ourselves, and a 20-minute job took more like 90. When we came back to our camp, we noticed how everything around us had gotten unusually quiet. The area we were in has hundreds of birds around, and as far as we have seen, 3 cats who sometimes pay us a visit. But there wasn't a single noise at all, other than our fire, which was dying out unusually quickly. It had gotten dark quickly, so we scrambled to build a fire to cook our dinner before we were asked to help the couple, and I had noticed the silence, but it didn't bother me. However, my brother suddenly grabbed my hand as we were sitting down to eat, and said, with clear fear in his voice, that we should do so as quickly as possible, and that he didn't feel safe. To ease both of our minds, we prayed. We're Christian, so of course we thought it would help. But I think it accelerated everything that happened, and just made whatever was there with us angry. We finished our dinner, and me being the skeptic, I was completely fine and pretty much just humoring my brother, until I started getting the nagging feeling that it was time to pack up and leave. It hit me like a wave, and I was quite taken aback by the feeling, So I voiced it to my brother, and he agreed that we should pack up right away and leave. We started packing up at a normal pace, and that's when we heard a sound very close to us on the opposite side of the pond, which wasn't that big. Something that I could only describe as the sound of death itself, and it seemed to go on for several minutes. When I say that we looked at each other in absolute fear, I genuinely mean I was ready to have a heart attack right there and then. At that point, after being frozen for a few minutes, and quite reasonably so, after hearing that bellowing screech so close to us, we turned on the car, drove it back so we could see with better light, and just started throwing everything into the car without much care, but with a whole lot of urgency. Sound of twigs snapping and footsteps all around us, then the shadows from behind the trees. I tried to get the shadows to change shape, walking around the trees and moving the lights, but nothing. It looked like there were people just staring at us the whole time, and you could really feel it, too. We felt like we weren't alone, and that we weren't with friendly entities either. We also noticed that all 3 cats were huddled right behind our car, away from the trees, so they weren't the ones snapping the twigs. I felt like whatever was there was getting closer, and I have never felt anything like it. It was a gut feeling, and you just know it's one of those natural instincts that you shouldn't ignore. Thankfully, we were able to pack up quickly, but it was still very silent, and at this point it was around 8 p.m., and it was unusual for that. I personally think I was most terrified as I was driving away back onto the main dirt path to leave the desert. I know cars very well. I know how they drive in the sand, and I know our car especially well because we've had it for so long. I could instantly tell that the steering was off and completely fighting against me. The sound of twigs snapping was still all around us, and it was loud enough to be heard over the sounds of the car. And on the path was what seemed to be like every bird in the area, just standing there and staring at us until we got close enough to force them to walk, not even fly, away. At one point, my brother just grabbed my shoulder and told me very sternly to just keep looking in front of me, and under no circumstance to look through the window. We were in a part of the desert where we had to pretty much drive through the whole of the accessible areas to get onto the highway, and there wasn't a single person around us. The only thing we saw was a very clearly abandoned Toyota Hilux, positioned behind a small dune and hidden by the trees, but was far enough from our campsite to be easily ruled out as the source of the original screech. The worst thing I saw was as we were getting close to the exit, we saw standing in the middle of the path, staring directly at us, a deer. I've only ever seen one deer in the 16 years of living here, and that was in someone's garden as a pet. It's safe to say that I was in complete shock, and the deer wasn't moving at all until I got close enough that we could practically smell the thing before it slowly walked off the path while looking right at us. We quickly moved past the deer, and again my brother, with a grasp and then very sternly said to keep my eyes right on the road. I asked him when we got on the highway what it was that he kept seeing, and he very reluctantly told me that he kept seeing large figures around us anytime we went through a bend, and they were all pointing either right at us or ahead of us. We were still yet to encounter anyone, but we still very clearly heard sounds all around us. When I saw the exit, I was happy as I ever have been, but that quickly faded when once again we saw another deer standing right in the middle of the road, slowly walking away and looking right at us. Except this time, it didn't really look like a deer, more like a kangaroo mixed with a deer. And its eyes were milky, and it looked rotten and horrible. But I didn't much care. I just stepped on the gas, and fortunately, it had gotten out of the way in time. When you exit the desert, you can either turn right onto a long stretch of highway, or you can go left and go through a small town and then take the back streets to a parallel highway. As I was about to turn right, my brother once again, with the same tone of voice, said to go to the town and to go left. Later, he once again said that he saw a line of figures pointing ahead of us. So if we would have gone that way, we wouldn't have made it home in one piece. Thankfully, as we made it farther and farther away and closer to our home, the gut feeling of being watched was going away, and of course, having never experienced something like this before, I was distraught and wanted to talk about it. My brother told me as we were going home that because we were alone, the jinn wanted to mess with us, that they wanted to scare us and most likely cause us harm. He also said that they caused bad luck and that he could feel them the second we entered the desert, which explains his clumsiness all day and the car that got stuck in such an unusual manner. This is also my younger brother by 3 years, and naturally any time he ever told me about this sort of thing, I always just dismissed it as him scaring himself. I can excuse the sounds we heard and the shadows we saw that night. I can excuse the gut feeling of just being scared. But I cannot excuse the 2 deers we saw staring right at us, and I cannot excuse the car just randomly fighting against me as I was driving. The deer completely freaked me out, as did the tone of my brother's voice, and it's safe to say, we're not going camping there again. I'm never dismissing my brother when it comes to this kind of thing again, and I am so thankful that we made it home safely. I just spent the summer out in the middle of nowhere in Florida, working at a summer sleepaway camp. This camp owns over 100 acres of pure forest, and before it was a camp, it was an airbase. For quite a few years now, maybe much longer, counselors and campers alike have been having weird experiences out there with tall shadow people. Normally there's a lot of fun storytelling at camps, but there is an eerie amount of correlation between some of these stories I've heard about this specific thing. Some of these people who have had these experiences don't know the stories from the others, like new campers having the same experiences as counselors from years ago. They all describe the same thing: tall, thin, shadowy figures of men, sometimes one, sometimes multiple. Their heads are apparently quite a bit taller than the top bunks in the cabins, which is a good 8 feet at least. Campers have described them as having to duck to get through the doorway. Twice in the past couple years, an entire cabin has seen these things. Usually, the counselors would think the kids were trying to mess with them, but because of the sheer amount of these similar reported experiences from campers, it's being taken more seriously. I feel like something weird is going on, especially when multiple 13-year-old boys are crying because they're so freaked out. On one of these occasions, the campers said these shadow figures came into the cabin and pushed their bunks around. The next morning, marks were left on the floor where the bunks had been moved. On a different occasion, only one figure came in and just stood, facing the corner, and the entire cabin witnessed this. On multiple occasions, only one camper has seen this figure, and it has only stared at them from the middle of the room. I myself had not had any strange experiences all summer, except for one. I was in the cabin on the counselor's side, about to take a nap, but was not asleep yet, just recently laid down. I was on my side facing the wall. There was nobody else in the cabin. Twice, within the 45 minutes I was there, something sat on the bed behind me. The cheap mattress sagged a bit, like if a person sat down, and I rolled a little. Of course, when I turned around, nothing's there. This happened to me and my girlfriend I was dating back in the summer of 2014. This all took place in South Carolina, and my girlfriend and I wanted to take a camping trip. We initially tried to go to a place 45 miles from our hometown, but they were going to charge us double what we thought we were going to pay for. We decided to head back, and it just occurred to me that there's a spot very close to where we live. Now, I will say it's more boondocking and off-grid. We didn't have to pay for anything, just parked the car and we got out. This place is quite gorgeous. There's a historic bridge and trail. Also, some of the oldest railroad tracks in the South. We got there before sunset, so we had plenty of time to pitch the tent and set everything up. There were a few cars when we arrived, but they were most likely hikers and would be gone by nightfall. The only thing that made us uncomfortable was a busted up and rusted old white van with no license plate. We both pointed it out, thinking it was weird, but we shrugged it off and started walking to a good place to set up camp. After several hours, around 3 a.m., following some quality time spent with her and taking in all the nature and then going to sleep, we started to hear this obscure singing and walking around our tent. Anytime you hear commotion that early in the morning, nothing good can happen out of it. I peered my head out of the tent to see what was going on. I didn't see anything or anyone, but nonetheless, I didn't want to stay in that area, and we were both freaked out. Just because I couldn't see anything doesn't mean it's not there. I barely did a decent walk around our tent. As we were quietly gathering our belongings, we swore we heard the singing get louder. I recall words in this song he was singing had. "Now won't y'all come out?" Followed by this raspy laughing. Once we finally packed the tent, that was when crunching on the leaves and his humming is what we heard. We knew this guy was close by, and we booked it. I grabbed her hand and threw the tent and folding chairs on my back. We made sure to run the opposite way from where all the noise was coming from. Luckily, we set up camp fairly close to the parking lot because I could see lights through the trees. As we ran and scurried away from whoever was chasing us, we noticed the lights from the parking lot wasn't just the street lights, but also, to our horror, it was that old rusty white van we saw at the beginning. We hurried up the hill, just hoping this guy was alone. His van was right in front of me. If he had an accomplice, that would be another person to deal with. As we reached the lot, we got into the bright streetlights. I noticed my girlfriend's hand make a slight twitch, and her pace slowed down from that. I could tell she was turning her head to look at our attacker. I heard her gasp loudly. "Come on, don't look, we're almost out of here." She focused back and we continued running in unison. The guy was getting closer as I can hear the noise of the gravel intensify. I heard his wheezing and him barking, "Don't y'all think you can get away?" As we just made it past the van, we split, and I handed her the keys so she could unlock and start the car, and I can throw all of the gear in the truck, and we can make it out of this place. As I frantically laid the camping gear in the back seat and head to the driver's side, that's when my body faced forward for the first time in a while. Every noise this guy was making was close and amplified now. With the car running, I kept my head down to put it in reverse, but curiosity got the better of me. In the brightness of my headlights, this man was a behemoth with a stern, wrinkled face with red, patchy hair, a goatee that had dirt and crud smeared all over it. His eyes were fixated on us, like a scope magnifying on two 10-point bucks. He was wanting to kill. "Get back here." He barked, waving a baseball bat back and forth. I shook my head, and with that I swerved out, and we were on our way out with our hearts racing. In the rearview mirror, we saw the man slam the bat in frustration. A narrow escape. We drove to a Waffle House and spent the rest of the early morning there until sunrise. On Friday, I left work at lunchtime to go for an overnight bushwalk to a remote campsite in the national park that's about 60 kilometers from my work in Canberra. I decided not to take a tent, as I was planning to sleep in a hut that had a fireplace, as it's still winter here. This hut is about a 2-kilometer walk from any fire trails and can only be reached by walking along a narrow foot track that climbs a hill for about 45 minutes. The hut only gets a handful of visitors each year due to how difficult it is to find and reach. My car was the only one in the car park, and I never passed anyone else on the way. There's only one track in and out to this place. When it got dark, I started a fire in the fireplace and had my dinner. I was tired and decided to go to sleep around 8:30 p.m. as I planned to get up early to walk back to my car early this morning. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a loud machine, really loud, like being directly under a helicopter or something. When I peered through the hut's window, I could see bright lights flashing around, lighting up the trees, but I couldn't see the source of the lights, which made me think that they were above me. There was no way I was going outside to investigate, so I just sat on a camp chair, wondering what the heck was outside. After a few minutes, both the sound and the lights suddenly stopped, like they had never been there. There was nowhere for anything to land nearby, as the hut is in a very heavily treed area. After a few minutes, I got the courage to go outside with my head torch, and all I could see was some grass that had been slightly burned around the hut. Nothing else seems to have been damaged or disturbed. I stayed up for the remainder of the night and left for my car just before daylight came. There's no way that a vehicle could get to the hut, and I don't think that search and rescue would have a helicopter up at night in such a remote area, and there's no Air Force bases nearby either. The national park doesn't allow hunters, so I really have no idea what it was or what's going on. Last night at about 2 a.m., my dog started barking viciously. I have a German Shepherd. She's my guard dog, so I'm no stranger to aggressive barks. But this was the most intense behavior I had ever seen from her before. Again, I have really never heard her behave like that. I thought about getting a weapon. I was really scared that someone might be at the door, but then I remembered that my cat was outside, so maybe it was just my cat making a fuss. Even if it was an intruder, my dog would kill someone to protect me. I looked through our peephole, but no one was there, so I opened the door. My dog had been barking the whole time. When I opened the door, instead of going out to sniff around like she usually does, she planted herself in front of me and got even louder. She was guarding me. I have never seen anything like that from her. I looked out to see what it could be, and then I saw it. The first thing I noticed were the eyes. It was sort of like when you shine a light on animal eyes, sort of glowing in the nighttime darkness. I then noticed the antlers and thought it must be a deer. But then I realized its face looked about 9 feet above the ground. Then I noticed its body. I could make out the outline and tell that it was fur, but it was standing in a human-like position, hunched over almost, on its hind legs. I have never been so terrified. As soon as I realized I was looking at something paranormal, I slammed all of the doors, shut all of my windows, locked all of the doors, and hid under the sheets like I was a little kid. I'm still shaken up. I can't stop thinking about it. I haven't fallen asleep tonight because every time I close my eyes, I see it. I'm curious what this creature was. I know the appearance of a Wendigo is debated and seems to be controversial, but I am still terrified by what I saw. I live in rural North Carolina, with lots of woods, decently spaced out farmland, and lots of critters. I'm also a little more in tune to supernatural things than some people. Like my eyes well up with tears, and I get a spine-rolling chill if something that isn't human is around me. Last night, around 1:40ish in the morning, I'm on a call with my boyfriend, with my bedroom light on. My bedroom has a large window facing the road, and from around the corner of my eye, I see a blur of white dart back and forth twice. Immediately, I get a churn in my stomach, my eyes well up, and I get a shiver down my spine. Normally, I don't hone in on this, because I don't like to mess with spirits. My house has a few, and while I know I live here now, I also know it was once their house, and I want to be respectful to them and the place they live and died in. However, I completely freak out at this, turn my light off, slip under my blankets, and watch the window. The shivering is gone, for now, but there's a deep gut feeling of unease. My cat got up from where she was napping by the window and left my room in a hurry. Wouldn't even let me touch her, which is odd for her, because she's hyper-affectionate like a dog. And even as I'm writing this, she's in my lap purring up a storm. So that in itself was scary. However, my boyfriend has had experiences with supernatural creatures and entities, so I'm talking to him about it and he's trying to help me understand it. When describing its appearance, I tell him that the creature is tall, and then go on to, and so pale, to which he said, "Pale like me or pale pale?" And I responded, "Pale, pale, pale." The conversation keeps going, and my partner brings up skinwalkers and wendigos. I'm not claiming that this was either of those things. I simply don't know enough. Fast forward, my boyfriend asks out of the blue what his birthday is, and I responded with his birthday, asking why he would ask that. He said, "Asking for personal information is a good way to see if someone has been taken." And at the word taken, my whole body thrums, like I grabbed the cord of a guitar, pulled, and released. Later on, after I left my bedroom, locked my doors, checked that my cats are inside, and have rung a bell a few times, as a friend who is experienced in supernatural encounters tells me to do, I sit down and I begin to research. It's about 2:30, and I typed in Wendigo into Google. I receive no shiver and get the information. I then type in skinwalker, and the full body thrum is back, so I cleared my Google search bar and exited that square, and nothing happens after that. It was Rural Hill County, Texas, 2005. We had a couple acres of land with the majority of the property, pretty much all but the house, the second house, the shed and the driveway, being completely surrounded by trees. I was 5 at the time, and got in the back of our family car, getting ready to go to the store. My dad was walking from the shed, getting ready to take me and my brother, who was 6. We peek out of the back window, looking back at our dad, as we see from the right side of the forest a large, skinny, white, solid creature with long arms and legs, run out, bipedal. It ran just past our dad. I was young at the time, so bear with me, but it couldn't have been more than 50 feet away. We watched it run all the way past him directly to our shed, where it jumped on all fours and crawled under. The shed was propped up on concrete bricks, probably about 8 inches. My brother and I returned looks to each other, and we just started crying. Almost 20 years later, and my brother and I can still describe in full detail to each other how it was relative to the house and the shed and other things. My mother tells me she believes me now. She said creepy stuff happened there all the time. That moment gave me a fear of the outside for a long time. However, if I could, I would like to see it again, just to know what it is. Two weeks ago, me and a group of buddies were having a bonfire out in Kuna, Idaho. I was feeling down that night, so I decided to unload my dirt bike and take a little night ride on some trails. I went alone and rode for probably 3 miles from the fire up to the hill. I sat up there for probably 45 minutes, and I was 100% alone up there. There was nobody around. From time to time, I would start hearing small laughter really close by. It sounded like 2 to 3 people. It wasn't constant. I would hear it every 5 minutes, and it kept getting closer. I had that funny feeling that I wasn't alone after all. So I went to start my bike, and of course it doesn't start. I was able to bump start it going down the hill, and it did not want to stay running. I don't think it sat long enough for the engine temperature to drop all the way back down. I had to keep revving it to keep it running to head back to the fire. The whole time I was really scared for no reason. I couldn't convince myself to go faster than 5 miles per hour, which was strange because I always haul ass. I have a light bar mounted on my bike, so I was able to see just fine. At first, riding back, I thought I saw shadowy figures in the corner of my eyes, but they would just disappear. I made it back safe and nothing else happened, but I knew there was something out there that night. I didn't think much of it until I heard my buddies talking about skinwalker stories in the same area. People tell me I got extremely lucky that night. I don't know what to believe. Who knows what was out there with me that night? The laughter, my bike not wanting to run, the feeling I had, and the shadow figures are all things in common I saw from other stories. It was a strange night. This happened in North Las Vegas, Nevada. This is something that I experienced about 4 or 5 years ago. I had some friends over from out of town. We were talking about the paranormal experiences we've had in the past. During the conversation, we experienced a few odd things. At first, it was just a lot of loud walking upstairs. We were home alone, and it wasn't any of us. That part wasn't very weird to me. My family and I already believed the spirit of the previous owner was still in the house. We had a lot of experiences with her, and a neighbor had told us that she had died in the garage of our house. But as we continued with our stories, one of my friends saw what looked like a large black bird flying up my staircase. When we checked, we didn't see anything there, but since we all had our own experiences and reasons to believe in the paranormal, we decided that it was a sign to stop and change the subject. After that, things settled down, and my friends left the next day and went home. A few days after my friends had left, I woke up in the middle of the night. I think it was sometime after midnight, and as I would normally do, I went downstairs and got some water from the garage. When I grabbed the water from the pack, I looked up, and very close to me, I saw a figure standing there. It was very clear. It stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its arms, legs, and torso looked like a very muscular man, and its head looked massive, like a wolf. Its skin and fur was black like charcoal. As soon as I saw it, I bolted back into my house, locked the garage, and went straight to my room. The energy coming off of it was utterly terrifying. It's the only paranormal experience that I've had that I actually felt like I was in real danger. I did move from that house years ago, but still to this day, I have yet to have anyone be able to give me a solid ID on what I saw. Personally, I think it was either a demon or a skinwalker. I know there was a Native American reservation not far from the house. Additionally, just outside the neighborhood, there was a decent-sized plot of empty land that was owned by the Air Force, and my family and I had seen 2 massive coyotes, bigger than anyone in my family had ever seen, wandering the neighborhood. My husband and I went camping for the first time ever in Arizona as part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool place that was on a mountain overlooking a beautiful landscape. It's next to a cliff and in a really isolated location. I'm talking like 20 miles out on gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. So we get there and set up our tent and hike a little bit and take pictures of the surrounding area. We see a few cars parked around 2 tents and decide to stop and talk to the other campers nearby, because we had heard that there was going to be a bad storm that night. These were 4 guys who were from Arizona, and they told us not to worry and that the storm didn't get that terrible around this area. That was all the persuading that we needed to stay. Later on, while walking a bit further down the campsite, we see a woman with her dog and another older lady. We smile and wave and continue to hike down a bit further into the forest. Because of the storm, we are one among maybe a total of 7 campers that decided to stay and withstand the night. We watch the sunset when we get back to our site, make sure our car is only a few yards away, and go into our tent when it gets too dark to see. There are no stars tonight due to the storm clouds, and it hasn't begun to rain yet, so we decide to try to sleep right away so we could possibly sleep through the storm when it does hit. It's an insanely windy night, so it's hard to sleep, but eventually we get a bit of shut-eye. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. to the sound of some crazy thunder rolling through the mountains and the rain hitting down on our tent. I'm a little freaked out because they get a lot of flash floods out here, and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff. But I tell myself to try to sleep, and eventually I doze off again. It's 12 a.m. and I awake again, this time because I hear something heavy hitting the side of our tent. It full-on sounded like someone could have been punching our tent and sliding something down the side of it. I open my eyes and I can't see anything. It's completely dark, no light whatsoever. The sound continues every couple of minutes. Suddenly, I hear footsteps right next to my side of the tent. They are slow but steady. I seriously start thinking about how this is it, and I'm going to die. My heart is beating so fast that I'm certain that whatever is out there can hear it. Then, whatever it is, lets out a deep sigh right on the opposite side of the tent. I'm thinking it's a bear and realizing that I might actually have to face this thing. So in a desperate call for my husband's mind-reading powers, I squeeze his hand really hard repetitively, and he wakes up. But instead of reading my mind, he blurts out, "What's wrong?" Why are you squeezing my hand?" Right as he says this, the footsteps stop. I don't hear the footsteps again. So after a while, I break out of my frozen state and tell him what I heard. We decided it may have been an animal passing by. But whatever is hitting our tent continues every so often, and I'm starting to go a little insane from this night, wondering what's going on. We convince ourselves that it's just pine needles falling from the trees above us, and we try to sleep again. We just need to make it through one night, then we can laugh about this all in the morning. A couple of minutes go by, and suddenly, the tent caves in on my husband's side, right on his head. He whispers that it feels like something is pushing the tent down. I feel my heart instantly sink. I'm freaking out, thinking it's a bear that just sat on his head, but he decides to push back, and we hear the familiar noise of something sliding off of our tent that we've been hearing for the past few hours. We then realize that it's been snowing outside, and that the noise that we heard hitting our tent was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Our tent is covered in thick ice, and my husband pushes off the tent from the inside until all of the ice slides off. Still determined to make it through the night, and a little relieved that it was just ice and not a bear, we try to sleep and make it to sunrise. We keep on a small light that my husband, luckily, brought with him, just to calm us down a little. Things are starting to seem normal again, and we both close our eyes. It's 3 a.m. at this point, not even 30 minutes after we are settling down, and my literal worst nightmare happens. Out of the pitch black night, we hear a woman screaming. We distinctly hear her say, "What the hell? Oh my God, what the hell?" followed by some other non-tangible words that sound something like, "help." The way that she screams doesn't sound like anger, it sounds like pure terror and a sense of panic. My husband and I are both frozen, looking at each other. I quickly shut off our light and start panicking and asking what we should do. How is this really happening right now? While we are trying to decide what to do for the next few minutes, we hear her again, but this time she is screaming, "No, no, 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 no," as we hear a car speed off into the night. I'm in tears at this point. We have no idea what's happening. It's dead silent now, save for the icy rain hitting our tent. It definitely sounded like she wasn't in the car, but more like she was desperately yelling after it or begging not to be hurt. And this was the breaking point. Because I could take the bad weather, I could take the possible bear outside my tent, I could even take the ice falling on our heads in one of the warmest states in America. But one thing I cannot and will not ever be able to handle is a screaming person in the middle of pitch black woods at 3 a.m. We decide to get out of there and even contemplate leaving our tent and booking it to our car. But instead, we try to stay level-headed and grab our valuables and put them in the car first. We frantically gather all of our things and stay close as we shuffle to our car. I close the door and keep the lights off for a while, scared to attract any unwelcome visitors. And while my husband goes back to grab the tent, I start the car and call 911. I tell them what I heard and where we are, and they say that they're sending someone to the campsite to make sure everything is okay. Only thing is, we are literally in the middle of nowhere, and it will definitely take them more than an hour to arrive. Not to mention, the storm left those gravel roads in some pretty terrible conditions. So my husband and I decide to start driving. It's like 3:30 a.m. now. As we drive out of the campsite, my husband notices one last eerie detail that stuck with me. The 4 guys that we had talked to earlier had left. All 3 of their cars were gone, while their tents remained. Whatever scared them off, they sure left in a hurry. It was only after we started driving that the thought occurred to me, whatever was walking next to my tent may not have been an animal. It very well could have been someone lurking around in the dark who decided to go after the girl we had previously seen on our hike. I'm not quite sure what went down on that lone mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay. I called the police department back to follow up, and was told that the cops searched the area for a few hours and talked with a few people who were still there, but didn't find anything. I had spent the better part of a week camping in the desert and stopped at the Taco Bell in Kayenta, Arizona on my way back to southern Utah, where I lived at the time. When I sat down, an older man with a limp walked over and asked if he could join me. I felt a little strange about it, but I hadn't spoken to anyone in days and could use some conversation. He opened up to me, told me a little bit about his past on the Navajo reservation, his estranged family, some verses from the Bible, he was a Christian convert, and how a local pastor at a church had been helping him to get back on his feet. I was unsure if he was evangelizing or maybe wanting some cash or something else completely. I'm still unsure, in fact. Then his story turned dark. He started talking about seeing ghosts and how he had been possessed by a demon twice. Maybe he still was. He wanted to show me videos on his phone of one of the spirits in his house. I watched a blurry streak of color that appeared in the middle of the kitchen on his phone, but it looked like there was a filter applied to the video, and it could have just been some sort of reflection or interference. I was unconvinced, but there was a feeling of uneasiness settling into my stomach. The story continued for a while until I told him I had to be headed home, when he asked me for a ride to his house around the block. He had a limp and it took him 20 minutes to walk home in the cold, but it would only be a 3-minute drive. Again, very uneasy, but I said yes. I mean, after hearing his story and the hurt and struggle in his voice, I felt compelled to at least help him in this small way. He expressed a lot of gratitude when I said yes. He directed me down the main road, away from the business strip in Kayenta, toward a very dark block of scattered homes and open desert. The uneasiness turned into dread, and I kept asking him over and over where his house is, and he would just say, "It's right up there." The thought that he may have a weapon crossed my mind as we were heading farther away from traffic, lights, and people around the main strip of town. We entered what looked like a run-down, abandoned subdivision of very small homes with the occasional working streetlight. I didn't see a single sign of occupancy, no lights in the houses, no cars in the driveway, until 2 silhouettes of men seemingly appeared from nowhere and walked across the street in front of me, only to disappear again. I was terrified as I asked him again where his house was. He sensed my uneasiness and assured me it was just around the corner. Sure enough, we turned the corner and there was a little house, same as all the others, with a light on inside. I could let him get out here, he said, and he thanked me and said God bless you, and walked to the front door of the house that was supposedly occupied by spirits. It was a bizarre encounter, and I just have this feeling, even now, that I met this man for a reason that I don't understand. I've questioned whether or not the man actually existed, or if I imagined him. In any case, I felt these feelings of unease, dread, sympathy, and anxiety that I have never experienced in the same way. This happened this morning around 1:30 or 2 a.m. in a large park on the edge of a Phoenix, Arizona suburb. I'm not too familiar with skinwalkers, I'll admit. I have heard them by virtue of growing up in the desert, as well as a casual fascination with spooky stories. This morning, I was meeting up with an old friend from high school around 1 a.m. at a nearby park to booze and catch up on life while walking around the field. We heard a loud, repetitive noise coming from the park that I assumed to be a coyote, but it didn't stop. It almost sounded like a soundbite of a child wailing, but choppily and perfectly repeated. The noise had a sort of mechanical element to it, if that makes sense. We would hear it for intervals of about 10 seconds, then it would stop for a few, and then start again. We were both immediately perturbed and headed back for the car to hang out in the parking lot close by. As we walked away toward the car, however, the noise ceased. Unfortunately, when we arrived at the parking lot, my friend realized he had forgotten his phone somewhere in the field where we had heard that strange, loud noise. We drove back and ran to go pick up the phone and found it. But when we entered the park, the noise started again, but this time from a different corner of the park. Naturally, we bolted out of there, and the rest of the night was fine. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the support that you continue to give, and if you aren't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It's completely free and it really helps the channel. Also leave a like and a comment on this video if you want to help the algorithm. I also just really like talking to you guys and hearing from you all. And without any further ado, let's listen to some scary stories. Last weekend, my 5-year-old and I went tent camping in the Uintas northeast of Utah. The weather was overcast weather. By the time we got done paddleboarding, we made our way back to camp. Once we got back to camp, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I mostly shrugged it off, thinking I'm overthinking the safety of my child. One thing to point out, there was a trailer and a truck close to us, but I never saw anyone throughout our experience from there. At around 8 p.m., we started our campfire. We roasted broths and ate snacks. During this time, I would think I heard a crack or a subtle movement, and thought it was just the embers popping. Once the sun finally set, I noticed it was completely pitch black outside the reach of our campfire, most likely due to the overcast weather. At this point, I decided it's time to pack up our food and take it to the car. But I had this sudden feeling that I was being watched, and I decided to turn my headlamp light on. I faced 30 degrees to the right in front of me. About 10 to 50 feet from us, I see a small bush-like tree. I want to explain. This small bush-like tree was not thick or sturdy enough for something big to lean on or climb onto. And above the tree, standing behind it, I see 2 big circle white eyes with a hint of purple staring straight at me. The animal creature was far enough from the glow of the fire that I couldn't see the silhouette of a body, but it was close enough that it was odd behavior, and it was only seconds from us if it ran towards us. My first thought was that it was a bear standing on its hind legs, just being curious. It looked to be 8 feet tall or so. As I had my light facing the creature, who was abnormally close to our campsite, I grabbed my kiddo and bear spray and told my kid that there's a bear behind the tree, and assured him that we would be fine. This creature just watched us intently. Suddenly, a few seconds later, my intuition screamed, "Get out, now!" I then started walking backwards towards my car and told my kid to walk slowly with me. The creature made no movement, and tilted its eyes on us as we moved away until my light could no longer reach it. I can't explain this new type of fear I was experiencing. It was unnatural. I think prioritizing my boy's safety allowed us to get to the car in a much more composed manner. Once in the car, we waited 30 minutes to see if it would come to the campsite to look for food, but nothing happened. I thought perhaps it left and we could sleep in the car to be safe. I decided that I'm going to try and grab blankets from the tent, put out the fire, and we can pack out first thing in the morning. I thought wrong. The campsite from the car was about 150 feet away. To the right of us were big trees, and to the left of us is tall grass and brush. I get out of the door and turn my headlamp on. My light shines towards the brush, and laying low in the brush, I see the white eyes again, staring up at me. I decided to try and act big and yell out at the creature, but it made a move towards me, which in return made me jump back into the car and reverse. I tried to shine my car lights towards it and couldn't see anything. I decided to find help. I drive down and find a friendly fellow dad camper who is happy to help me pack up my things to leave. He arrives with a much brighter flashlight and his truck. As I am packing, he sees the eyes and mentions there's 2 of them. He states they're not moose, deer, cougars, and if it's a bear, it's really odd behavior, and he doesn't know exactly what they are. I face towards where he is shining the light, and I see a second pair of white eyes. At this point, I am terrified. One of them is standing tall, while the other is lower. This time they are much further back, as if they now know there's a new reach limit to the light devices being used. It wasn't until the lower set of eyes decides to stand up and be much taller than the first one, looking monstrous. This made my new friend very uneasy, and he quotes, "This has got me on edge. Let's just throw everything in your car and leave." The whole time, while we were packing out, I would catch these creatures making a perimeter around us. They just walked around the campground in circles, waiting for something, it seemed. To give some perspective on the scenario, we live in an apartment complex at the edge of town in Illinois. Right next to us is a woodsy area full of coyotes and deer, and lots of birds, so it's pretty lively. Last night at 3 a.m., my fiancée went outside to grab a case of water from the trunk of our car. She claimed she heard someone say, "Hello," in a girl's voice, coming from the woods. She couldn't see anything, but she replied back confused, saying hello back. Whatever it was ended up saying, "Can somebody help me?" And that's when she got the chills and ran as fast as she could back into our house. Right before she entered the house, she said she heard it again, with the voice getting closer and asking for help. But instead of a normal girl voice, it turned into a girl voice that didn't even sound real. "Somebody help me." And she couldn't explain the change in the voice. She said afterwards, thinking about it, that her voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't point out whose voice it was. I live somewhere in North Carolina. It's not a small city by any means, but it's basically a highway town at its core. I've lived here for 10 plus years. On the night in question, I was with my ex. We'll refer to her as Z. This was right around the time when COVID-19 restrictions had yet to be fully lifted, so Z invited me for a walk. She was finishing up her online courses for the semester, one being physical activity, so we'd often walk around her neighborhood to reach a daily amount of steps or something. Anyway, We head out on this walk. It's around 7 to 8 p.m., so on our way out, the sun is already setting. We stick to the street, as there isn't a sidewalk and we're just walking through the neighborhood. I've been down this area hundreds of times. I've drove there nearly every day to be with Z during the pandemic. It's just your average single-story, cookie-cutter, every house looks identical neighborhood. On our way back to the house, it's dusk, a weird time of day, especially on this evening. It was almost a gray-looking atmosphere, but still illuminated enough to see the streets. Z is on a phone call for the entirety of the way back, so I'm just taking in my surroundings and waiting for the walk to be finished. That's when I see it, whatever this thing was. About 3 houses down, mid-jump, arms and legs fully outstretched and leaping across the street. It lands on the other side in an instant, with barely enough time to register that anything had even happened at all. At the time, it felt like a hallucination, something fictional that my brain had just conjured up out of boredom or lack of visual content. It happened so quickly, but this flash frame is burned into my memory now, and is something that I'll probably never forget. Firstly, it was huge and 100% silent. I only caught sight of it flying across the street and landing underneath a car. It was fully outstretched and took up almost the entirety of the street. Even with its hands on the ground, its rear legs were still stretched from the jump and extended far beyond the halfway point of this 2-lane road. I can only guess the size of this thing was 10 to 20 feet in length. It looked extremely thin, but startlingly human from the waist up, 100% dark gray. Its arms seemed to be car length, with large claws, and its legs were bowed in a way that reminded me of a dog. The only feature I couldn't make out was its face. It seemed completely black, but scarily human. Again, at the time, I had no idea if what I saw was some sort of weird animal, or just a hallucination. Even so, I kept my eyes glued to where I had seen this hallucination land. As I got closer and closer to the car, I almost wanted to freak out. Z was still on the phone though, so I decided to keep quiet and inspect the car for myself as we walked by. I turned my head as we slowly passed the vehicle. At this point, I'm convincing myself that what I had seen couldn't be possible, but I just couldn't bring myself to peer and look under that car. As we walk away, I turn back a few times, really trying to process if I lost my mind for a moment or not. By the time we got home, I almost feel embarrassed. Did I just have a stare down with a car for absolutely no reason? By the time we walk inside Z's house, she's off the phone. We were kind of bummed that our walk was void of conversation, so we just catch up and converse for the next half hour. The hallucination had almost completely left my mind at this point. We just ended up going about our usual business. Honestly, I was just happy to be spending time with my partner. I was ready to accept that what had happened earlier was nothing more than my imagination. I had forgotten about the experience almost entirely, until Z asked me out of almost nowhere, "Did you see something jump across the street earlier?" This all took place a few days ago, still unsure as to what's going on. Anyway, I was sat in my room playing some Xbox when I heard what sounded like a dying animal coming from outside. I heard it a few times earlier that day, but this time it was much louder and much more aggressive. This, of course, freaked me out, so I went outside to investigate. For context, my window leads to my backyard, which is right next to a laneway, separated only by a crappy little fence. I walk outside and head to where my window is to find my dog going buck nutty at the fence, barking and scratching. The strange noise had stopped, but I realized that a bunch of other dogs in my street were also going crazy. I initially thought that maybe some strays were fighting and one had got injured, so I stuck my head over the fence to have a look, but nothing was there. I calmed my dog down and headed inside to the front window that looks out onto my street. Mind you, this window is quite hard to spot from the street, which makes this next bit extra freaky. The dogs in my street were all still going crazy, so I looked out the front window, expecting to see some dogs chasing each other or something like that, but all that I saw was a strange-looking man walking down the road. His back was turned to me, and I stared for a bit, trying to analyze the situation. That's when, out of nowhere, he turned full 180 and made direct eye contact with me. When his eyes met mine, I quickly ran from the window. I gathered my thoughts for a second or two and decided to look back out and see if he was still standing there, but nothing, no one, he was gone. The time between me leaving the window to me looking back to see nothing was much too short for him to have left. This whole experience left me quite shook and confused as to what I actually witnessed. When we were young, my cousins and I had a bush house at the end of the back garden, just before the garden opened up on the heath. Due to me being a full-time wheelchair user from birth, it was Gran's idea that instead of having a treehouse that had to be climbed, it would be safer and more practical to have a bush house that all of us kids could use. Even though we protested greatly, although I am disabled, I frequently used to climb trees in my local parks and over the heath, with the help of my cousins, obviously. But Gran's word was final, and we never argued with her, as she was a beautiful and lovely matriarch, but also as tough as old boots, and very scary when pushed. So we busied ourselves on choosing an appropriate bush for our new play area. On selecting a perfect one, Gran delegated tasks to the older boys to clear the outer area of the bush, and also make a little hollow inside it, with pieces of spare wood on the ground to serve as a basic floor so that my little wheelchair could run safely and easily inside it. Gran was reasonably young at the time, and while the boys were doing the heavy work, she arranged us younger ones in getting furniture, supplies, and accessories to make our new play space cozy and comfortable for us all. A year later, and our bush house was in full use. In the daytime, us younger ones played in it after school. On weekends and holidays, and in the evenings and nights, it was a place where the older cousins could have some privacy, away from the eyes of Gran and Mom to do whatever they did. Our bush house was cozy though. We got chairs, beanbags, and floor cushions donated by relatives and friends of the family. We also had a small table that we made a tablecloth for, and our Auntie Jay made some pretty curtains that we hung up the best that we could. We even had a cupboard where we kept snacks in, and, only when older boys or Mom were there, we were allowed to use the camping stove to heat tinned beans and sausages, or pot noodles up and make tea. Gran's bingo friend Jean donated a hand-me-down rug. It was shabby and out of date, but we thought it was beautiful. It was slap bang in the middle of summer holidays, probably in early July, when this happened. Elle and I were 7, and G was 11. Our older cousin G's brother, A, was there earlier, but by 3 o'clock, he had grown tired of hanging around us and had gone out with his mates. The 3 of them were coming back later to make us all dinner on the stove. Elle and I were sitting at the table, playing Beggar Your Neighbor, with a pack of playing cards that we got from the living room cupboard. And G was sitting in the corner of the bush house on the beanbag, reading The Secret Garden. It was just a normal day at home. Nothing unusual or odd occurred, until around 4, when we all heard a sound that was at odds with the peaceful scene. It was between a growl and an owl's hoot, and a man mumbling. We weren't particularly outdoorsy kids, being born and raised in the outskirts of urban London, but being bright little girls, we all knew that owls are nocturnal creatures, and the accompanying sounds that were mixed with the hoots didn't come from the same bird. The weird sounds were joined by a furtive and stealthy rustling coming from the back of the bush house. Actually, it was really near to where G was sitting, and she jumped up, stifling a scream by covering her mouth with her hands. We also saw a dark, dog-like size and shape through the dense foliage of the back of the bush house, which incidentally led straight onto the beginning of the heath, as I said earlier. The strangest thing about this figure was that it was very present and rather ethereal, almost as if the figure was attempting to hide intentionally. Also, throughout this period, there were no other natural sounds, no birdsong, no insect sounds, and no background human noise. Being right in the center of a council estate, you could always hear people talking, cars revving, and dogs barking, all the regular noises of urban community living. But at the time, it was as if the entire world had paused, and us three were the only conscious and present ones, along with the mysterious figure. We didn't know what to do, but we gathered together, and both G and L took one handle of my wheelchair and pulled me back out of our bush house, not taking our eyes off the translucent figure as we went. When we were free from the bush house and close enough to home for us to feel out of danger and safe, we just looked at each other, very doubtfully. G suddenly said, "Stay here, don't move or speak." She ran to the garden shed and climbed up the side to the manky, rotting roof. I completely lost it, letting out a squeal of utter fear. Quick-witted as usual, Elle put her hand over my mouth and hushed me. Elle and I watched while G looked over the hedgerow, which divided our back garden from the beginning of the heath. From our position, her face was clearly visible. G's expression was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and fright, and her pretty brown eyes looked troubled. We waited for G to come back to us before asking her in earnest what she saw. She didn't answer straight away, but when she did, she said, "It was so strange. I didn't see anything. No dogs, no other animals." She paused, her young mind trying to summon the words to explain what she witnessed. "There was a man. I saw the back of him walking away towards the iron fence." My 7-year-old's mind found it hard to comprehend what G was saying, and one look at Elle told me she was experiencing the same. We both said together, "What man, G? What did he look like?" G sighed, biting her lip, a habit she still has today when she's anxious, worried, or trying to explain something tricky or difficult. "I didn't see him properly. His face and all that. I only saw his back. He did have really long, scruffy hair, though." Her eyes wandered over nervously to the end of the garden, leading out to the very public heath. Elle and I both followed G's gaze. We all shuddered. Nobody spoke for ages. For a long time we sat in silence, G and Elle sitting on the back step, and me in my wheelchair alongside them. Suddenly, I noticed something and exclaimed to the others, "Everything is back to normal. Listen." We all listened. The regular everyday noises had returned. The world appeared to have resumed business as usual. A while later, A and his 2 mates came back, and, sensing some tension between us, they asked us what was up. We did tell them everything, and 2 of them ran out to the back to have a look around. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they returned, they said they didn't see anything, no strange man, no animals, nothing unusual or dodgy at all. We spent the rest of the day hanging out with the boys, eating dinner in the bush house, and later watching films and eating junk food. We didn't tell Mom about the experience until a few years back, long after we were grown, and we still don't know, or can't explain, what happened that day. My house had a strange energy growing up, always did. But then when I turned 10, my mom made the worst decision in her life. She had bought me a Ouija board because I saw one online and I was begging for it. So I got one. For my 10th birthday party, I held it at my friend's house, her little trailer. There was about 6 of us, all about 10 to 11 years old. We played the Ouija board in her kitchen, which was connected to her back living room. Her back living room had extremely scary vibes to it, and I never slept back there because of it. So we just started asking questions after we lit a bunch of candles. We connected to a woman named Abby. She spelled out words that were violent and horrible. I'll just say that. After spelling out that she died because of someone else doing something bad to her, if you know what I mean, the candles went out. We were in the complete dark. Nobody blew out the candles, and then we all screamed and everyone started crying. So a while goes by, and me and my friend Alex continue playing with this board to talk to Abby. She told us that she was a young girl who passed away in a violent way, and that she was angry and wanted to harm us too. The next day, I got a message from my friend saying whatever I did to her at the sleepover wasn't funny, and now she hates me. Dramatic 10-year-olds. I had no idea what she was talking about. She sent a photo of a large scratch on her back. I continued receiving things like this from my friends. Then it happened to me. 3 large red marks on my back, like claws. A while goes by, and honestly, I'm struggling to remember what happened. I recall Abby saying she wanted a body, so I brought her a doll. The doll had light brown curly hair, a red bow, and an older Victorian red velvet dress, and green-brown eyes. Her skin was porcelain and very fragile. The doll would move around on its own, and I always became very uncomfortable around it. The older I got, the less activity happened. I thought that she had left me entirely for a while, until I saw a psychic, and she told me I had an extremely dark energy attached to me. She told me it wasn't a little girl, as Abby came off as a younger girl or woman usually. She said it was most likely a demonic energy. I used sage and everything to try to get rid of it. For a while, this worked. Then when I was 14, I bought dowsing rods, and I was messing around with them with my friends at school, boarding school, so I wasn't home. My friend was talking to her male cousin who had passed away, and all of a sudden, my other friend screams. She turns around and said something that I will never forget. "She hurt me!" We looked at her back, and there was blood everywhere. After that, we closed the rod session, and I went into a full-blown panic attack and explained everything about Abby. These girls never even knew about her, and the one girl who got scratched said that she had been dreaming about the doll I talked about. When I went home, I got rid of the doll and made a vow to never bring her up again, except for this post. I will never be able to explain why the girls and I both got scratched. Most of the activity in my house is now gone, but something is just off every time I hear her name, or anyone who remotely reminds me of the doll. One of the most evil things I have ever encountered was a little girl named Abby, who was not a little girl. Back in the early 2000s, my parents and I lived in a neighborhood that was heavily involved in witchcraft, Satanism, etc. We didn't actually discover this until we had moved away, so it all made sense afterwards. We lived in this house for 5 years. Our house was 2 stories. We had a basement, which was our family room, that also had a separate office room. We detached the door to the room so it would be permanently open, directly facing the couch we would sit on to watch TV together as a family. Adjacent to the office, we had an electric piano right against the wall, so the office entrance would be on our right if we were sitting there. To go upstairs, you'd have to directly pass the office and face the door that goes into our garage. This info will be important later. The first year was fine, but gradually the events became more malicious and sinister, to the point where we couldn't take it anymore. We were likely the only Christian family in our neighborhood, and I believe that others caught on because we didn't celebrate Halloween, and we didn't participate in giving out candy to the neighborhood kids. This angered our community, even though we were kind to others, and we kept to ourselves for the most part. Our house was egged, and we became a target of seemingly harmless pranks and house vandalism. Then, all of the paranormal events started happening after my black cat disappeared right before Halloween. We were coming home from church one night, and it was close to midnight. We pulled into our neighborhood, and sitting on the sidewalk corner all by himself was a little boy in a green shirt. My parents were slightly unsettled because it was unsafe and unusual for a child to be out this late at night. They considered talking to this boy, but when we drove up to him, he looked up, and my parents saw that he had no face. A completely blank slate where his face should be. Needless to say, we booked it home, and my parents didn't tell me at the time, because I was maybe 5 or 6, to spare me from nightmares. But some years later, they told me this and what happened. Then things started happening around the house. My mom and I used to take piano lessons. So one day, while my dad was cooking lunch, my mom was in the basement practicing on the electric piano. I was in my parents' room watching Stanley, a children's cartoon that was really popular back then. While my mom was practicing piano, a child's hand popped out of the office room and mimicked a child's voice, telling my mom to come and play. She thought it was me and told me to cut it out. The voice coerced her again to play, and my mom became irritated that I was distracting her from practicing, so she stomped into the office to find no one there. I'll never forget how pale she was when I heard her scream my name and run upstairs. She asked my dad where I was, and since I heard her, I ran to her, asking what it was that she needed from me. She asked me if I was messing with her, and I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. My dad chimed in too, and said I was in the bedroom the whole time. She concluded that it must have been her imagination, apologized to us, and went back downstairs. Not even 10 minutes later, she runs back upstairs, panicking, saying that the child's hand appeared again in the office, talking to her, and she knew it couldn't have been me. She was freaked out the rest of the day for sure. Another instance was when we were watching The Ring in the basement at night. Around the time of the first jump scare of the movie, when they open the closet and see the disfigured girl, my dog starts barking like crazy at the office entrance. He would charge at it and then back away, as if something was trying to force its way closer to us. It became really cold, and I started crying because I felt scared and uncomfortable at my dog's strange behavior. My dad turned on the light in the office, but nothing was there. My dog was going nuts, chasing something we couldn't see, so we decided to call it a night and go upstairs to bed. My dog had a big crate in the garage that he would sleep in, so my dad put him in there before we went to bed. At this point, we called a minister from our church to come and pray for us. He prayed for our protection, but things got so much worse after that. A few nights later, we all woke up to screaming coming from the garage. It sounded like a little girl being brutally murdered, screaming so loud that it pierced my ears. My dog was also barking like crazy, so we knew we had to do something. My mom and I hid behind a dresser, and my dad hesitantly took a long decorative bamboo stick as a weapon to go to the garage and see what was going on. He said that he was shaking going downstairs, and the screaming got louder and more violent, right up until his hand touched the doorknob. As soon as he did, complete silence. It was eerie and too quiet. The only thing making noise was my dog whimpering and barking, so my dad got him as quickly as possible and noped right back upstairs. We started sleeping in the same room after that. Once we settled back down, my mom and I fell asleep first, but my dad was wide awake. He said that he could hear something pressing buttons on the TV remote on his bedside table. He didn't dare look, but shut his eyes and pretended to sleep until he eventually did. Another day, my mom was at work, and my dad was outside mowing the lawn. Being an only child, not interested in AOL dial-up internet yet, I had to find ways to entertain myself. I was spinning in circles until I made myself dizzy. Mid-spin, I saw a man standing in the hallway with a gun pointed right at me. I was so startled, but I was so dizzy, so I fell over, scared to death. I screamed for my dad and ran slothily to the front door. I didn't want to look back if he was still there. Dad was worried sick for me in my panic state, but what can he do? What could any of us have done? Dad put up the house for sale and sold it to the first buyer. We were out of there so quick it wasn't even funny. These events traumatized me, and I'm extremely hypersensitive to evil spirits and evil energy. Horror movies don't scare me at all, compared to the real fear and panic you feel in those moments. When I was about 11, I attended a birthday party on a farm in the middle of nowhere. They pulled out a Ouija board and asked it questions. They were all answered correctly according to the kiddos. I didn't participate, but I was in the room. I was young and I had no idea, and I thought it was just a board game. But ever since that day, I was never the same. I would see and feel a menacing presence. It seemed to follow everywhere I went and affected me emotionally and mentally to the point where my doctor diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. Fast forward to about age 24 or 25. My mom noticed my behavior had gotten worse and erratic, and since she was Buddhist, she brought me to the temple. The priest or monk advised my mom that I had a Western ghost attached to me for the last decade, and to send it off with offerings. I believe she recited a prayer and offered it fruits and food. This is normal in Taoism. And since that day, I have felt like such a huge weight has lifted off my shoulders, and have felt a lot lighter. But that night, after taking a shower and stepping out, all 10 of the little light bulbs atop my mirror shattered onto me and I received a cut on my foot. It felt like a last F.U. to me. Fast forward to 8 years later, I experienced something at my family's house when I was visiting last week. I was having an intense disagreement with my fiancé in the living room, and I felt irrationally upset and angry. And I saw an anger in him that I had never seen before. I kept seeing a head pop in and out really fast, multiple times, coming from the wall next to the kitchen hallway. It felt very mischievous. It was a dark shadow. I thought it was a family member checking in or my eyes playing tricks. But it happened multiple times, and I kept seeing it over and over. The next couple days, I felt uneasy and felt like something was watching me. Then my fiancé sees a figure in the house next to us. He would tilt his head, confused as to why this person was staring at him and copying his movements, moving his head right to left, and the shadow would copy him. He was so startled he called out loudly to me. Mind you, my fiancé is a huge skeptic, and paranormal things never happened to him. I knew something was off. There were a couple of nights where I felt like we were sleep-talking to each other, and I'd wake up feeling a presence. It's continued for the last 3 days, so I feel like something may have followed us home. Send your true encounters to storiesforaries@gmail.com, and I might just read it in one of my next videos. Thanks for stopping by, and as always, thanks for listening. My name is Akravi, and I'm a 49-year-old woman living in Greece. For years, I have been hiding a story, which is the only abnormal or maybe paranormal thing that happened in my life. The incident took place in the late spring of 1990, and back then, I shared with the authorities the parts that could be helpful to them. Nothing ever came of their investigation, and now, decades later, I decided to tell the full story. Seeing how easily people share their experiences online, it gave me the courage to tell mine. I'm not sure what really happened that night, but I need to get it off my chest. I was 19 at the time, and I was the first person to visit my grandparents' house since my grandmother died 5 years before. The house, up in the mountains of Greece, remained empty until my parents decided to spend their summer there. I offered to visit, to clean up, and to report the state that it was in. I wasn't thinking only of them, though. I wanted to try out nudism, and the isolated mountain house was ideal. It was 2 kilometers of rough country road away from the closest village. There were 2 other houses around belonging to relatives, but they were just as abandoned. I found the house in a good state, but the vegetation around had grown wild. This was great for me because it decreased the already slim chance of someone seeing me naked. I spent the first day cleaning the house, and it was a lot of work. After a shower, I fell asleep until around 3 a.m., when a violent shake of the bed woke me up. It felt like a single blow of an earthquake coming from the left of the house. I turned on the light and looked at the light fixture that hangs off the ceiling to see if it was oscillating, but it wasn't. I brushed it off and I went back to sleep. I relaxed the following day. The house had no landline, but it had electricity. I opened the old black and white TV set and lay naked, inside on the bed or outside under the shade, on a wooden lounge chair. I fell asleep early with the TV set open. Then, past 3 a.m., the shake woke me up again. The light in the room was on as I left it, and the television was still playing. I was spooked that it happened 2 nights in a row at nearly the same time. Maybe my sleeping cycle got screwed up for some reason and I'm just waking up at this hour, I thought, trying to rationalize it as I got up to close the TV. As the sound from the program playing died down, I heard voices talking from outside the house and from a distance. Again they came to the left of my house. The area there is so quiet that the wind can make voices or music sound a lot closer than they are. Apart from that, I was too disturbed from the repeating shakes that I preferred not to go out exploring in the middle of the night. When I stopped hearing them after a few minutes, I went back to sleep. I woke up again at around 8 a.m. After making coffee, I sat outside in the clean morning air, pondering about the shakes. It annoyed me that they came at the same time every night. Old memories of my grandmother came back. Here I was, sitting naked in her house on a hedonistic trip, and it was the first time that I had thought of her. I felt bad about myself since she was such a kind woman, and I hadn't even taken a moment to honor her memory. We used to take long walks around the area, and she would tell me about its history. Supposedly, the location was dimmed of bad luck, and people outside our family chose not to build there. I didn't believe in the paranormal, but the thought of a curse made me shiver. What would really terrify me, though, was if I was becoming mentally ill. But I was feeling great and behaved as usual, and apart from the shakes waking me up, I slept fine. Sometimes I have lucid dreams, but most of them are enjoyable or meaningless. Anyway, I decided that since all of the shakes came from the left of the house, I would explore that side. I already knew what was there. The house was on the less steep side of the hill. To the side was 300 meters of dense forest, and then a big rock cliff looking down to a 100 square meter field accessible from the country road. There used to be a path through the forest to the rock cliff from my house, and since it was a closer distance than the country road, I decided to try the path. I covered myself in thick jean trousers, an old military jacket my dad had left, and I took a small axe from the shed. It came in handy since I had to hack my way through the path. Even when I reached the rock cliff about an hour later, sweating and swearing, I looked back and the path was barely visible despite my hacking. On the rock cliff itself, I saw no sign of human activity. No fire, no debris, nothing. But when I went to the edge of the rock cliff and stared down, I saw two young, tall men. They were pale and blonde, looking North European. Surprised, I pulled back and fell on the ground. They had cleared a circle in one side of the field with a fire pit in the middle. They had also cleared just enough to fit their tent. The two men were talking, and after a while, they undressed and sat naked under the morning sun for a while before going inside their tent. The hedonist young female spirit inside me was excited to have young men around me. Maybe they were Euro travelers, and we could spend some time together. But I couldn't fight the feeling that there was something wrong. Why did they go to sleep in the morning? What were they doing all night? It wasn't like there were nightclubs around here. I was unsure of what to do. I didn't want to face the two men alone. The closest telephone was a few hours' walk, and even if I called the police, what would they say? The field they had camped in belonged to my family, so they were trespassing, but it was unlikely that the police would immediately travel many dozens of kilometers from their station for such a complaint. I decided that the safest thing to do was to go back home and return late at night to spy on them from the top of the hill. So that's what I did. 1 hour before the sun went down, I left my house, moving silently through the woods, and I reached the cliff. The night that came was moonless and dark. In its cover, I went to the side of the cliff and looked down. I saw a fire blazing at the center of the circle. The circle was also ornate with symbols. Maybe they were runes, but don't quote me on this. I couldn't see the men anywhere, and that gave me the creeps as I feared they would sneak up on me from behind. Then I finally saw them, moving from their tent to the circle. Their appearance made me shudder. They both wore black robes with symbols on them. They also dragged with them a wild hog that had its legs and mouth tied. I realized that these people were occultists and that they would perform a ritual that contained a sacrifice. I felt the presence of evil, and cold sweat ran down my back, but at the same time, I was in disbelief. This can't be happening. This only happens in the movies, I thought as the two men stood facing one another on opposite sides of the circle. The tied pig was beside one of them, jerking its head, trying to free itself. They started chanting in some language that sounded like German. They went on for many hours during that time, and nothing happened. Their chanting became slower, but it was always constant and persistent. I laid face down and continued watching. Initially, my heart was racing, but as hours went by and nothing happened, I became bored and sleepy. This was when I must have fallen asleep. I was awoken by the gut-wrenching squeals of the hog. I had expected a sacrifice, but I couldn't imagine the brutality I witnessed. Seeing the helpless animal treated like that made me want to scream, but the fear of my life prevented me, along with the sensation of wanting to puke. I didn't want to watch anymore, and I pulled back, closing my eyes and ears, while trying not to faint from the feeling of sickness in my stomach. Then it happened again, the shaking. This time I was sure I was awake. The chanting had stopped, but I could hear below German speaking and laughing. I knew that looking could be a mistake, but my curiosity was stronger. With my body aching from sleeping on the hard ground, I crawled back to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The two men were standing next to each other. From the pit, in the middle of the circle, an orange-blue column of fire spiraled high, and the smoke that reached me had a sweet metallic taste. Before the men, a being attempted to stand up under the excited gaze of the occultists. It was taller than them. I could see the creature's back, and it had the elongated body of a wild hog with legs and hands that were grotesque copies of human limbs. As the beast grew steady at its feet, it left a groan that froze my blood and scared even the occultists. One of them raised his hand and gave a command that the beast seemed to accept, and stepped back. The two men looked at each other pleased, but the creature moved forward again, giving an angry scream. Everything happened fast after that. The same occultist as before raised his hand and commanded. Nothing. The beast bit him on the neck, between the head and the shoulder, in a matter of seconds. His body became loose and fell to the ground when the monster's mouth opened. I saw its head turned, face towards the other occultist. I didn't want to witness this. I got up with difficulty. Some of my body felt frozen stiff, while my legs were like jello. I walked, sometimes crawled, through the forest towards my house, crying and covering my ears from the man screaming. When I reached my home, it was past 4 a.m. I locked myself in and didn't open the door until noon. Everything was calm by then. It was the most peaceful day you had ever known. It all seemed like a bad nightmare, and I wanted to believe that it was. I forced myself to walk to the country road to the field where the occultist camped. The tent was there with some of the clothes. The circle was there with the burned-out fire and some surviving symbols. The men were nowhere to be found, and no sign of the creature. I went back home, and after preparing a backpack of water and food, I walked for an hour to the closest village to call the police. I told them that 2 Germans were camping illegally on my parents' land and were lighting fires. I waited for the police in the village with their vehicle, and we drove to the field. Their search had the same results as mine: the circle with the fire pit and the symbols, the men's belongings, and no remains from humans. They left the tent and the men's belongings for a few days, and since the men didn't appear to take them from the field, the police loaded everything in one of their cars and hauled it away. Everyone in the village was puzzled, since they hadn't seen the men before or after the incident. As you can assume, I picked up and I headed back home. In the summer, when my parents were vacationing there, the police came back and asked for me. They wanted to talk to me about the incident. They called me to my parents' house in the city of Preveza. They had found a car stolen from Athens mid-spring by 2 young men. The car was found parked on a private road 500 meters away from the field, and it was covered with branches. They wanted to know if I had seen that car when the men were trespassing. I hadn't. and after telling them, I asked if they had found the men or what they were doing on the field. They didn't want to say, but when I asked the officer if they thought it may have to do with witchcraft, he laughed out loud, not accepting my idea of the circle and the rocks forming the rune symbols. He closed the conversation, but not before chuckling with my ideas and saying, "What are you smoking?" indicating his belief that I was doing drugs. I was ashamed, but also relieved that I didn't have to come out with the full story to them. If I had, I would surely be labeled as crazy. 30 years later, I have since got married and had kids of my own. By necessity and during family holidays, I have spent time in that field. It was all normal, and there was never talk from the locals of a hog creature running loose or anything weird. Apart from me, no one ever remembers the case of the 2 young trespassers. It was a nightmare that came and left. I can swear that what I wrote above is true and happened, but knowing how the mind can play tricks, I can accept that the latter part of the story was a dream that my mind created after witnessing the torture of the animal. But it didn't feel like a dream. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever happens, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m. we realized we had to head home. But on the way back, we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home, and the street didn't have many streetlights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off and their Halloween decorations were taken down. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but he seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said that an older man living in that house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around, but we couldn't see them. I was a pretty paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom loved watching crime shows, and she would always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of these was a story about fake cops. Although I don't remember the details, I remember people can pretend to be police officers to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said that he needed to speak to this potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, this man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for him to invite us in, jump out, and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but we had limited time. The street was silent, and he could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing he would just hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us we had to decide quickly, But then a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said that he would be right back and not to go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house and the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it was not alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation, moreover, with our parents not present. I wonder what his motives were, but it will, unfortunately, remain unsolved. I was huge on costumes. This night, my mother drove my sister and I to this mini strip mall where a discount clothing store had just opened maybe 3 months prior. The reason I call it a mini strip mall is because the only other open businesses were a Sally's beauty store and a Marshall's. It was a last-minute trip, and it was easily 8:30 or 9 p.m. or later, so the Sally's was closed and both the Marshall's and the clothing store were going to be closing within the hour. That being said, this clothing store was surprisingly massive once you got inside, and for Halloween, they decorated the place wall to wall with really cool decorations and costumes. It was very easy to get separated from your group in a place this big, as it had many tall rows that were nearly impossible to see over. Shortly after my family and I entered the store, one of the workers in the dressing room section put on a skeleton mask and jumped out from behind a rack of clothes, frankly scaring the crap out of me and me only. My mom and sister, of course, had a great laugh and separated from me to go shopping on their own. I know it was in good humor, so I go looking for a costume of my own. I had a serious addiction to my MP3 player during this time, and had my headphones in while I was browsing. But I kept getting this chill on the back of my neck because it felt like I was being watched or followed. At some point, I took out one of my earbuds and turned down the music, and I heard the creepiest whistling noise. There were a few other families in the store shopping, so I told myself I was being paranoid, but I went to find my family anyway. They tell me that they're going to go a few doors down to Marshall's and shop there before they closed, and that I was welcome to keep costume shopping at this store, and to just come find them when I was done. My mom gave me like $20 and she and my sister left while I continued shopping. The feeling that I was still being watched and followed never left. I eventually started looking under the clothing racks as I walked, and I saw a dirty pair of black sneakers on either side of me more than once. However, I never saw this person's face. At this point, I knew I wasn't finding a costume there, and was starting to leave the store to walk to Marshall's to find my family. I distinctly remember hearing the footsteps not far behind me at all as I'm leaving, even weaving between different aisles like I was. My heart starts beating fast at this point, because I know I'm not imagining it anymore. I ran track in middle school, so I was able to pick up my pace pretty smoothly without losing my breath. The footsteps behind me did not falter. It wasn't until I was out of the store that I finally turned around and looked at who was following me. I remember my heart freezing when I saw him. It was a white male, probably no more than 35 years old, dressed in all black, with his hoodie up, and just staring straight at me. He didn't have any bags, so he clearly wasn't shopping there, and while I'm staring at him and making eye contact, he doesn't stop following me. In fact, it looked like he was even smirking. Looking back on this, I wanted to hit myself for not screaming for help then and there, but sheer terror just locked my vocal cords. I immediately turned back around and broke out into a sprint. The Marshalls was several doors down and a good running distance from the original clothing store, but I'm not slowing down at all because I can hear this guy running behind me and how hard he's breathing to keep up with me. This guy was determined. I remember making literal whimpers when I realized he was gaining on me a lot faster than I was expecting. I was terrified that he would snatch me in this dark, mostly empty strip mall and that I would never be able to get to my family in time. A last-minute burst of strength got me through the Marshall's automatic doors, but to my literal horror, this guy runs in the store after me. We're both still going full speed and my brain hasn't stopped to think of anything besides run at this point. Luckily, I was as tiny as I was quick on my feet, because last minute I jumped between two revolving stands with cell phone cases and headphones, and I knew he wouldn't be able to jump through because of his size. He literally shoves one of his arms through the gaps and lunges at me and tries to grab the back of my shirt. Luckily for me, he makes a lot of noise doing so and more people in the store start to look over. I haven't stopped running at this point and I had no plans to, and by the time I find my mom, I'm babbling and sweating and crying, and the last thing I see of the man is him making a quick retreat from the store. To this day, my mom and sister think I'm still over-exaggerating this story. They firmly think it was a prank played by the man working at the store with the skeleton mask, and I hate that that even happened because it really discredited my story and fear to them. The man working at the store with the skeleton mask was a teenage boy with a bright red uniform shirt. The man that stalked and almost successfully kidnapped me was a grown man who had the most terrifying atmosphere I'd ever been around. There's many things I wish I had done differently, but to this day I just thank my lucky stars that I was small and quick enough to evade him. I didn't have my cell phone that day either because I had gotten into some trouble, so if I had been taken, there would have been virtually no way to find me.